start off by saying welcome again. We've got one person out sick who will be Zooming it, and but again, start off with thanking the library for the generous use of this space and the friends of the library who brought it forth, especially Mario and Ann. Mario actually not only is doing all this technical stuff, but he put together the flyer that was published.
Thank you. You're welcome. I have a blank screen.
And has been running the, I'm not depending on that right now. I'll just talk to the folks who are here. And has been managing the email contacts, the ones besides my letters to you. So how are you doing with studies?
It's a lot.
Yes.
It's a lot. I feel like these last few chapters are just like, really a lot.
Yeah. Anybody finished going through the videos or the readings?
I didn't quite finish the reading.
It's 2/3, yeah.
Anybody started reviewing the part that you have read because you're waiting to get all the way through? One thought I had, and I don't know what is going to be available, whether it would be Zoomable or not, but I always had in mind the possibility of doing another session. If people are interested, another session would be focused on the test.
Totally.
Yeah?
Totally.
You know, it's it's one of these mysterious things. This business of studying online is a whole new phenomenon. This was an experiment, and certainly for many of us, there's a whole other thing with doing something in person and reviewing and being able to move through things and stop and help you understand something. I'd be glad to do that. I'll have to see about what's available from the library. The other thing that's difficult with the online part is discipline. To just actually, life is so consuming that to schedule and say, okay, I am going to schedule this hour and I'm going to study for this hour, and let everybody else who wants to impose on your time know, get things done that have to be done so that space is open. But that's part of the learning, and certainly an experience for me to actually see what comes back from people. Like this is the part of the experiment, and trying to conceive how to
Okay, so this is what my screen looks like.
commit to time management. When you've got a class that's going to be at a certain time and you have a very fixed assignment that you're going to get tested on, there's a different kind of focus that we were all trained to do in our youth. So we're well trained at that, sort of have it built in, so there's a positive side in one way. But clearly that's something that I haven't understood well enough to give more direction to. But we're getting there. The fact that people are saying, I'm almost there, or this part towards the end was really slow going, that means you got through a lot of stuff already. And that's what counts. My favorite word, a certain teacher's term, gradalis. That's my motto in life. Gradually. Every step counts. Every step forward counts, because you're not there anymore. You're here, and the goal is that much closer. So we'll keep trying to take steps that way. And I'm trying to sort of suss out where to go with which part of this.
I need to know where everybody is in terms of when you guys expect to do the test.
Yeah.
I have some thoughts in mind for myself, but
That's a very good point, and it's from what I've in preparing for this. I read a lot from people who had studied and tested online and their own experiences. And certainly, and of course, these are selected group because they're the ones that were shared by people who were producing these kinds of materials. And, there are some people who are crazy capable. One lady took all 3 of them in one sit down, and she went through, I don't know, she didn't take that many hours. It's just some people just get it in this way of thinking. They've got memories like crazy.
Soak it in you.
My cousin's 2 children who are 9 and 12, check it.
Yeah, yep.
I mean, he's a
That's awesome.
he
Yeah.
has his license and has since he was in high school, but I was like, wow, if they can do it, we should
Yeah.
be able to.
Right,
But their minds are quick. They can
exactly. Their minds are very alive. That's for the capability of thinking, the youngsters have got it way over us. We got a lot more experience, and we got a lot more clutter and habits that they don't. Yeah.
I thought there was an age limit, requirement,
Yeah.
but I guess there isn't.
Neither end. Neither end. There's one fellow who's over 100 years old who's licensed and operating. And I think the youngest I've heard of was 6. But there are 6-year-olds who are concert pianists.
Yeah.
Another breed. But the key that they all mentioned was setting a time when they were going to take the test. And it's actually a good thing you have to schedule the test ahead of time. I don't know if did anybody follow up and just look into the things I sent?
Yeah, I looked at, it seems like there's one that's like on the 30th, which I think is a Sunday, like 2 Sundays from now, in,
Poughkeepsie.
An in-person?
there was one, I think is it called Schoharie? It's like
Oh, yeah,
in
that's
this
up.
direction.
Yeah.
And it's like, the reason that it stuck out to me was because it's kind of in a time frame that I could kind of imagine doing, and also it doesn't require you to sign up ahead of time. Like, it's like at a firehouse, and I
Yeah.
think they just.
The in-persons you don't usually have to sign up for, right?
Which I was like, well, that might be nice, because then I wouldn't have to like sign up and then be like, oh, I didn't get it together.
The in-person ones are great. When I took my license test, it was basically like a review class, and they just kind of went over the test.
Oh, yeah.
The morning before you took it, and they went over all the questions in the question pool for the technician, because that's, where they want everybody to get their foot in the door, so. Mount Beacon Amateur Radio Club puts it on, and they do it at the Dutchess County Fire Emergency Management Center.
Oh, okay, yeah, there's one of those in like 4 or 5 weeks, I think.
It's fantastic. If you can go to it, I highly recommend it.
Oh, okay.
The instructors down there are great, and you sit down, like Christian said, you take one test, take the next level, take the next level. And
If you want to.
yeah,
So
you
you
can go for the trifecta in one day.
So you showed at the time, and then did you take a class with them?
I did. I
Or-
went it was a Friday evening,
Okay, so there
a
was
full
like
day
a
Saturday, and then the test is on Sunday.
Got
But
it.
there was only a handful of people in the actual class for the weekend.
Okay.
And then Sunday, like everybody comes rolling in to take their test.
Okay, yeah, there's one of those Sundays that I think is in like 5 weeks.
Awesome. Highly
That's
recommend
soon though,
You
and
said
that's
it's called Mount Beacon what?
it. The Mount Beacon Amateur Radio Club hosts it, but it's at the Dutchess County Emergency Management Center.
if you just search Mount Beacon Amateur Radio and exam.
Yeah.
You'll find the website easy, and they'll have a listing there. I actually just talked to a guy who probably is one of the people who runs that, because that's exactly what he described to me as and so it's.
BOS.
I'm sorry.
His call sign's W2BOS.
Different guy. Anyway, there are a number of different processes for taking it and for studying. That's halfway to the. So the most common is like 6 half day on weekends. That's what I did. It was more than a half a day, maybe because we went across lunch, but a little bit more than half a day. And then on the other extreme is a ham cram, and there's actually a website for that one, and they do it all in one day. And that's the no nonsense. Well, there's ham cram and no nonsense are kind of related. They don't look at anything but the right answers.
Or to have the all hand knows handbook.
And the whole, and the concept is all around short-term memory.
Yeah.
And I would say that one of the best tips that I've ever heard about this, I learned about it online, and I've passed it on a number of times, and people have been really happy because it makes so much sense. There's the one part is learning for it. The other part is taking the test. And a great tip for that, as I mentioned last week, it's how I got my A's on chemistry without understanding chemistry. It's short-term memory. And what you do is you go through the question pool the night before, and you don't look at anything but the right answer. And you don't dwell on it. You read it solidly, you read the answer, and you go on to the next one. And you go through the question pool with that. The next morning, you do the same thing before the test. And that's short-term memory. And especially with multiple choices, the odds of, a lot of them you'll just remember, but if you don't remember, the odds are way up that you will get the right multiple choice without necessarily, it will just feel more right. How are we doing?
Not well on this.
No, we're not getting it.
Can we send audio?
No.
What information do you have to give them when you?
We're
do
dead
this?
in the water.
You're here as a review, right? Because you did
Yeah.
take your test and
Yeah.
you did pass it. What do you give them? You give them an email address. I'm not talking about like the people who you register with, but like when you actually do the FCC.
Oh, when you get all that,
Like your
everything, your name, your
address,
address, your
email.
phone number, and you can request to have that information hidden because all call sign information is public.
Oh, okay.
So there's a little box you check on the website that says
Oh,
hide
yeah,
my
I don't think I
information,
remember
because when
that.
you tell somebody your call sign, you can reverse look up and find out exactly where they live. Unless they have that information hidden, so,
I don't
yeah,
remember that
interesting.
Yeah.
hiding
Interesting.
option for the.
I don't remember it either, but I wasn't looking for it either.
Yeah.
'Cause I'm not,
I'm kind of.
don't care.
With the federal government right now.
They can find it.
It's like, I don't even know like who's on the other end to even process any of this,
Exactly,
or like whatever.
exactly.
We're just
It's
doing-
actually, it's a really quick process. And as far as I know, they haven't gotten to the FCC yet, so. They're still doing their thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about it, but definitely if you're concerned with it, hide your information
Yeah.
when you get the chance, just for privacy's sake.
Yeah, I would definitely, I'm always like, information.
Privacy
everywhere.
first,
Yeah,
privacy first.
yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's a,
The other thing
it's an
too
awesome
is
process,
the software thing here.
do you have your, what is it, the GMRS license yet?
I haven't done anything
Okay,
yet.
so when you do register, you have to register with the FCC, what is it?
FRN.
FRN number, right, and they associate that with your name and your call signs. Once you have the FRN number, you can apply for the GMRS license.
Which is like the
35 bucks,
Yeah.
and your ham license is actually 35 bucks as well.
Okay.
Once you get that, you have to send the FCC, I just did the online payments with the credit card and everything.
You're not in the
Just
room right now.
right through, no problem.
Okay, and because the first one, the walkie-talkie one, doesn't have a test, does it just generate a number for
Correct,
you right
yeah,
when you?
yeah, it gives you a call sign and, lets you know what it is.
Okay, so it gives you the FRN, and then you pay, which is free, which is just like a starting point.
Correct, correct. That's
And
the
then you pay
registering
$35, and then
process.
you get the other one, and
Yep.
then you take the test and you get the third one.
Correct.
Okay.
And I think the test fee is, like $15.
It varies from 15 is the most common. It's set by the people who do it. There are a few free ones, there are a few $5 ones, there are a few $10 ones, and the most common is 15. But that link that I sent you has got the whole list. You can look through any of them for what their
Yeah,
fees are
yeah,
Awesome.
and also what their schedule is.
yeah.
There is one club that has it every day.
Oh, no kidding.
They've just got a group of people, and out, like you got. I know one fellow was in a club in Southern California, had 650 members.
Wow.
650 members, you need 3 people with at least a general license to do the test, and it's pretty easy.
That's awesome.
So the online ones are much more available, but we've got a number of clubs within reach here that do exams periodically. So amongst them, the ARRL exam site, link site is another one. I don't know how they have them listed for looking up dates.
When are you thinking of doing yours?
I haven't looked into it, but probably I should do it soon enough where I still remember at least some of it.
Yeah, it's important to
Because
just.
I do not have a short-term memory, so like my kids
Yeah.
look at this book and I'm like, whatever.
But
I
so
don't understand it.
that's the great thing about that tip that I just suggested is that it's, there's 2 ways to do it. You can do the ham cram where you don't even try to understand anything, but working to understand it as you read, this basic grasp of things, and then using the short-term memory thing to call on what you've built up because it doesn't otherwise easily come up, is a great tool. You only need, you can miss 9 out of 35 answers, so you can just miss some. And it doesn't hurt to very often the in-person ones will let you take it again.
Yeah.
I don't without a fee, and I don't know about the online ones. They have to do more. I don't know.
The in-person one was if you failed, it was another $15, and you could take it again.
Oh yeah, you can take it as many times as you want. Some of them charge and some don't.
And you also run an emergency.
Just a preparedness YouTube channel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a YouTube channel, not
Yes,
an
ma'am.
in-person.
Well, I try to get in-person things together as much as possible. Yesterday, we were supposed to host a first aid CPR AED course up in Glens Falls, but nobody signed up for it, so I didn't have to go, unfortunately.
But how many of those have you had? You've been doing them pretty regularly.
This would have been number 4. We've done a lot of CPR AED first aid, then we do the wilderness first aid as well, but the CPR AED is all a prerequisite to take the wilderness first aid. Wilderness first aid is going to take Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday all day, and
Pretty thorough.
yeah, it's very hard to cram the CPR AED and all that into it. We tried it once, and it was just so hectic that I think a lot of people didn't walk away with enough knowledge from it.
Yeah.
So in the future, we're definitely going to do the CPR and all that stuff first, and once
Yep.
folks are ready for that, then we can move on to the wilderness first aid, which is all that stuff with nothing, just whatever you got on hand.
I took one of those from Knowles, like a 3-day one, a few years back.
Oh, they're awesome.
It was really good.
Yeah, so
I'd like to
informative.
redo it actually. Like it's like,
They're great.
yeah.
They're great. So I'm looking forward to hosting a couple more medical classes this year, and maybe like a bug out bag weekend or something where folks come out and test their gear out for at least an overnight and make sure it works.
Yeah.
There's so many people I've seen that have everything brand new in the bag,
Yeah.
and then they get to the woods and they have to unpackage everything. They have no idea how to set anything up. Some of the things they open and they're broken right from the factory. So it's important to test that stuff out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been fun.
What's the name of the YouTube?
Hudson Valley Prepping and Survival.
Yeah, it's really like pretty tedious to do that stuff on your own.
Oh,
It's just like, cause then you have to like make all of these decisions
by
and figure
yourself.
out all the structure
And nobody to run
yourself
it
and-
past,
Yeah.
That's the big thing. It's like,
Yeah.
do I
Columbia County has been running some like preparedness
Yeah, the preparedness
classes.
seminar.
There's one very soon, maybe even next weekend or
Yeah.
something.
Like a
Or do you
cert class?
find that those are
Not a
useful?
cert class, but like an introduction to preparedness.
Okay.
Um,
But isn't it, it's statewide and it's just landing here?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, they
Yeah.
do them all over the place. I went to one in Rhinebeck at the firehouse a couple of years ago.
Do you
Really
find
cool.
like are they worth it?
For
Like,
somebody
been a couple
who's
times
new to
and-
preparedness, absolutely.
But
totally-
if not,
totally worth
if you're
it.
like
They're gonna give you some preparedness items and a little starter bug out bag, you know? So it's always good to go and make connections and meet new people, and typically hosted by like the county emergency
right, that's
coordinator.
who's, yeah.
So it's really good to know even who those people are.
Yeah.
So super handy. They give out lots of information about the volunteers and different people in the county who do different things, and always asking for help, you know. So it's cool. I highly recommend going to one if you can.
I went to one
No,
in Pasadena, I went
completely
to one in South
disconnected.
Pass, and then I did another one in Pasadena a little while later, like right before the pandemic started. And like Pasadena, it was put on by the fire department in Pasadena, which is like a really serious fire department. Like
Oh,
these are
yeah.
people who are like, cause it's like the Rose, like because of the fires and also because like the Rose Parade and the Rose Bowl
Oh,
are in
yeah.
Pasadena, and like Caltech is not far away, and like NASA is not that far away.
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's like a lot of like emergency management people in that area, and
Awesome.
it's like they really knew what they were doing. Like they were like not, you know,
Yeah, not
repeating
amateur,
people.
not-
Like there were like
sure.
a lot of expertise there. It was pretty cool to see. There was
Awesome.
we like did this whole like circuit outside with like all of these different things that we had to try doing.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Any chance of pulling back to the way that you had it set up?
I have no idea what's going on.
With just going the simple way that you guys came up with? I feel like we need, if we're going to go ahead and start,
Yes, why don't you do that?
we just would need the PowerPoint. And there are two different parts to what I'm going to do today.
PowerPoint up.
If somebody could run the PowerPoint
It's up on the Zoom.
or put it over here where I could run it.
It's up on the Zoom there.
I mean, to move it forward if we don't have a clicker.
Okay.
Yeah, but it has to be, you'd have to have it beside you. Somebody has to have it beside them and keep moving it. It moves very quickly.
I'll do it.
Can it be moved over to where you're
I
sitting?
don't want to touch anything because it's going to break something.
You better get a chair over there then.
If you could just continue,
We'll give it a shot.
yeah.
So, what we're going to be looking at two sides today. Where I want to get is ought to be kind of obvious is to the material world, to radios and stuff, and setting up a station and interconnecting it, and what the various bits are, and how to power it, and antennas, how to get signals out and receive them, everything you actually want to do with radio. But before that, I want to delve into what it is, what is underneath all of that. So we have this basic understanding of what's underneath that. We want to get to communicate. That means messages, two ways, one way, two ways. It's the message that we want to get out there, but we have to have something to carry the message. Yeah, they say, for instance, if you're on the moon and you take off your space helmet for a moment and try to speak to somebody next to you, they ain't going to hear it. Yeah, because there's no air to carry your message. And we take that for granted, but in fact, we're using a medium every time we have a conversation. Yeah, and we're doing something with that medium. It's interesting that part. Well, but first I want to step back from where I was going there, because that's where that will be the underpinning. And just to recount, last week, or 2 weeks ago actually, we had the swing set, the coil and magnets, and moving one would set the other one moving, and when they swing back and forth in sync, and we realize that they're generating electricity. That moving coil is generating electricity, and I made a drawing which was simply just to recount, to track when the coil is still, there's nothing happening. When it gets really fast, the voltage, current, power gets more and more until it's at its fastest point at the bottom, decreases to zero, and then it starts swinging the other way. And the same thing happens. It gets stronger and stronger and then weaker. And so this is a track of the electrical power, the amount of the electrical power from zero to a very high degree of voltage and current. This is not something that needs to be remembered for the test. So really, the one coil is being a generator, it's creating electricity. The other is responding as a motor. And it's the same principle as a microphone and a speaker. And it's really good to understand that what a microphone does is it changes an electric current in response to your voice. Yeah? And so we want to send messages. In order to do that, we need a medium. And when my voice projects in radio terms, it's called propagation. My voice propagates, it moves out. That's my propagation is a signal moving on, moving out. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to see that happening, because it must be happening in radio, where we wouldn't have this communication. So what is it that moves? And it's as we mentioned, this discovery was by Michael Faraday, and it's electromagnetism is what he's discovering. And he's discovering that an electric field, a moving electric field, has a magnetic field as well. The two are intertwined whenever you have an AC current, which is the name that I didn't have up here, that intended to, alternating current. And it's called that because the polarity alternates between plus and minus. It's what's in everything having to do with electricity and our regular use of it, everything in the home, everything in transmission of it, is this electromagnetic field. And to understand, it was Faraday who was the first to be able to picture this electric field is a change in space itself. Remember the picture that I gave you of a field of brown dirt that over time begins to get greener, and the green emerge more and more until they harvest it and you realize that it was a cornfield. A space with a potential to manifest. Well, we have an anything AC, alternating current, which is everything having to do with household and transmission. This cord is plugged into the wall. It's got, theoretically, it has an electromagnetic field associated with it. So I actually have a field tester here. Yeah, very handy device. This is another one, another model. Let's see. There we go. This is a notice that I'm holding this, I'm not getting shocked. This isn't touching the conductor, but it can pick up on the electromagnetic field and tell you that it's there. I'd mentioned that as handy as these devices are, I've had a half a dozen of them, and these are the only two that actually work consistently over time. They have a terrible way of eating batteries, and these two companies have come up with ways, this on-off switch, and you press this one to turn it on. I always test it before I do anything where it matters. I make sure that it's actually working before I test a circuit that I'm going to see whether I'm going to put my hand on it or not when I'm working on a circuit breaker or something like that. Mario's and most hardware stores have this one. GB, Gardner Bender is a good one. Anyway, electromagnetic field, essential concept, but the real discovery for us, the next step was first a scientist named James Clerk Maxwell took Faraday's work and understood that even though he had like a third grade education, and then he was self-educated from there on out, became one of the great scientists in the world, but he didn't really have a lot of mathematics. He'd never studied that, but his mind thought mathematically is what Maxwell said. So Maxwell took what Faraday had discovered, and the way he described, he did an incredible amount of experimentation. And Maxwell took what Faraday had described, and after years of work, he was able to mathematize it, put it into formulas that are still the basis of modern physics today, fundamentals. But looking at the meaningfulness of the formulas themselves, Heinrich Hertz was the first to realize that the way, even though Faraday had worked in things that were just in wires, even though the wires could affect something in a wire right next to it, the formula suggested that there would be electromagnetic radiation that would spread, that would actually propagate, and it wasn't simply limited. In a sense, the work up to that time had been working with the magnetism. The varying magnetism would create an electric field in another coil of wire, just like it did in the swing. But Hertz realized that according to the formulas, it must be that there would actually be a radiation at the speed of light that would be unending. The only reason it gets fainter in a given space is that it spreads out. But in principle, nothing stops it. It just gets spread out more and more, so that it's, in trying to receive it with something physical, it's thinner and thinner and thinner, weaker and weaker and weaker. So this was theoretical. But Hertz actually tried an experiment using a spark gap. So he had something like just what I did with that voltage demonstration with that big arc. He had something like that as a generator of electromagnetic energy at random. A spark is random frequencies, but he had it tuned in a way that it would narrow what was actually sent out, and he made a circular coil with a spark gap, and when he got this one fired up, there was a spark showed up over here. So he demonstrated this electromagnetic radiation, and that's the key of everything having to do with radio. And I just want to walk us through a few aspects of that, and I want to go relatively quickly, and I'll go even more quickly because we got such a late start. But we'll begin by thinking about waves, because that's the fundamental in everything we do. And when it comes to actually using radio, depends on antennas. Absolutely key to everything about radio is the antenna. You have this electromagnetic radiation. To get it out effectively is the purpose of the antenna. At the same time, to receive it effectively is another purpose of it. And I would just, as a sort of thought experiment. I'd like to take you to take a look at this light bulb. Nothing unfamiliar. It happens to be an LED light because I wanted to have it correspond to radio in the sense of I commonly in the past have thought about this is the same electrical power as an incandescent night light, but it's a heck of a lot brighter. Yeah, it's over 10 times, about 12 times brighter than that bulb. But that is a 5-watt bulb, electrically, 60-watt equivalent. But 5 watts, that's the equivalent of one of your handheld radios transmitting. Okay? Now, think about this light bulb there. Turn out the lights, and you can read by it. But go across the way there, and it gets harder to read by that bulb. Now, think about going outside in the night and trying to read by that bulb. Yeah? It ain't going to happen, right? It gets dimmer and dimmer and dimmer in your experience because it's just you here. You're not encompassing the whole space that has filled with light, theoretically. It's hard to see. Now imagine going to Pine Plains and trying to read by that light. Now that's reachable with the right antenna. Try going to California with that and read by it. Now try going to Italy and read by it. You going to be able to? Of course not. But a radio receiver, that wattage, that radiant light right there, imagine how faint that is in Italy. Now, of course, we've got a different thing that we're not going to, we don't have line of sight to Italy. But the glow of that light is the radiant power from a handheld radio. And yet it can be received in Italy or Germany or the South Pole. How incredibly faint that is. This is an electromagnetic field that can surround the whole Earth and be picked up by an incredibly sensitive receiver, and we can hear it. The receiver and amplification so that what's received becomes strong enough for us to hear it. It's incredible, and there's a lot involved with being able to do that. So I want to just quickly go through wave formation. And I'd like to start with a little demonstration here. And Mike, you're about the right to keep this open here. And a couple of things I want to do with this. Let me try and get over here. First off is this one. Okay, now I put some energy into it. And the kind of energy I put into it compressed this part of the spring. Yeah? I gave an impulse, and that compression goes all the way down there. It propagates. But there's another thing that happens there. First off is that it gets down there, and he's not doing anything. He's just holding on to it. Now, that can be nailed to the wall. It's called reflection. The impulse goes back down there. It reflects and comes back here. The other thing about it that you can notice is that there's a regularity to that pulse. Yeah. So this is the same related to, this is a linear pulse here, and it's a compression wave. Yeah. So this compresses. In order for it to compress something else, when it propagates down here, there will be a compression, and as the compression goes through, there will be a place where it's called rarefied. Yeah, if we have one part compressed, some place has to be a little wider. So you have this alternating event in this compression wave. And now the next kind is this. This is a transverse wave, sideways wave. Yeah? Now I want to do something and try it out. And right now, if you see, there is one form. I'm moving it at just the right rate. This one's easy. That we have just this pulse. Now I can stop moving. I'm not moving anymore. Yeah, and it's continuing. Yeah. Now I'm going to try something else. And I'm not particularly good at this. Let's see, I think I need to slow down. Yeah, I had it. There you go. Now what do you see?
Wait.
It's this, but it's the same shape as before, except that there are two of them. You see that? They're exactly two. So before I got the rhythm right, this is like getting the rhythm right on a swing, except that we have extended it here. So this is called, we now have a full cycle. A cycle of starting here, going up here, coming down to here, and back up to here. That's one full cycle. And the fact that that cycle is exactly contained in one space here is called a standing wave. It's one wave, and it doesn't, as a wave, it doesn't move. It doesn't change. It's a standing wave, and you can, in the video that I was going to show, but we never got audio to go with it, they actually got up to 4 and even 5 cycles in there with that rhythm. So the concept of the standing wave, which is a wave that exactly fills a particular distance. And if they were anchored here, it exactly fills that. It's called a standing wave. And we'll go further with that. So quickly, how does a wave form? Imagine throwing a stone into a pond. And what happens? What do you see in the pond?
Ripples.
You see ripples. And what are the ripples? How do the ripples progress? First off, you just see the clunk of the stone and a splash, and then what?
Evenly, all the way across the pond.
They move evenly, as a radiating, propagating is what they're doing. They're propagating, filling the space around them. So there's an impulse from the stone hitting the water. Yeah? An impulse, just like I gave an impulse to the spring, or I gave the impulse in shaking it. It begins with an impulse. The impulse pushes down here, and if you're digging a hole, what happens to the dirt that you dig out of the hole? It piles up around you, right? So for this to be compressed down here, it has to have a reciprocal wave form up here that matches it. And then over time, you get this distribution of a whole series of waves, and they will always have the same period, the same space between this space in time. As they're moving at a certain speed, they will always have this rhythmic relationship. The next one?
But like in a lake,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm about to say something really, really stupid, but in my mind's eye, in
Yeah.
a lake,
Yeah.
which I guess is like just has the resistance of the water.
Yeah. Right.
It's basically like it starts out like and then it's like
Exactly.
these ones get
Exactly.
smaller
Yes.
and these ones get wider, right? I think
No.
they do. They don't?
No.
It's just getting smaller on this end, but not getting wider.
Right.
It's just difficult to see or something.
Right.
Like that. Okay.
And in fact, it would definitely, I understand how it would look that way because of it getting fainter and fainter and fainter.
It's just hard
But-
to discern.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the observation about them getting weaker and weaker and weaker is really important. That's why there's hardly any signal by the time a radio signal from a handheld is with the right antenna might definitely they reach around the world with 5-watt radios
But
in
that
HF.
Is it, you said that there was like a dispersal effect? So like if there's like energy and it's like all going out like in all different things, you were saying that it gets weaker just simply because I guess there's less of the energy in a bigger space or something like that? But is that a different concept from actual resistance itself? You know what I mean? Or is that like...
Yes, that's a really interesting question. There is a difference because in what we term resistance, the energy becomes heated.
Okay.
But I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. I think we can't go any further with that one
I know.
right now.
Yeah.
I think for me, when I finally understood a little more was when I realized that we're not when we say it's weaker out here, it's not true. As it, because it is the whole.
The total is still the same.
But we are
in more
we are just looking at this little part of it,
yeah. Okay.
and it's because of our selection. It's our selection gets a smaller part of the whole, and that's what the weakness is.
Okay, so like actually what's happening in the lake with the thing falling in it is not resistance from the water over
Well,
time?
it is.
It is? Okay.
It's the resistance of gravity because it has to lift the water.
Okay, but it's not enough to like make it feel warmer, is basically.
It would probably be slightly warmer.
Okay.
Okay, so no, so this is just a picture of getting a little bit, turning it into a technical picture. And why don't we go to the next one? We're going to be moving along here. So this is, we've just taken the diagram a little more abstractly, and the key points about this are the concept of wavelength, the concept of amplitude, and then there will be the speed of propagation over here, how fast this wave propagates. So this is one complete cycle. This is a complete, you can also measure it this way, and that's more common. One cycle is here, that would be one wavelength. So the wavelength is really important. What do I do to move it forward? Page down?
Just touch stuff.
Okay, thank you. So frequency and amplitude, just that we have the picture about frequencies that higher, the frequency is the number of cycles in a given amount of time. So we used to call it cycles per second was the general measure. And now the term for cycles per second is hertz, named for the guy who found this electromagnetic propagation, Heinrich Hertz. And the abbreviation is capital H, small z. So the higher the frequency, the higher the pitch. If you just can relate both low frequency as a low pitch and a long wavelength. Low frequency, low pitch, long wavelength. High frequency, high pitch, short frequency. And an easy way to remember that is to think about musical instruments. Think about a violin and a bass fiddle. Not electronic, because you can't tell them by that, except by the strings. So because the high frequency has a short wavelength, you've got a short body on the instrument. when you have the longer wavelength of the low pitches. So the bass has the low frequency and the big body and the low pitch and low frequency. And then amplitude is the other measure, and it's simply that a higher amplitude, this one is very quiet, and this is very loud because it's got a high amplitude. Okay, next. So there's the same picture, except we're trying to get a little bit of thought about frequency and wavelength. And there is a propagation which happens in our modeling of it. It happens in it. This is the transmitter. This is the antenna. And the wave propagates, moves on in time at a speed, the speed of light. It's very convenient that it's almost exactly 300 million meters per second. That's the speed of light is 299 point something something million miles per second. So the distance, the one cycle is the distance, the wave travels during one cycle some distance. Yeah? If you're traveling 10 miles an hour, you go 10 miles in an hour. If you're going 50 miles an hour, you go 50 miles in that time. So that's what this is relating to, how far it travels in a cycle. And we'll just move on to, it's more about seeing what it means. This is the formula, but the easier way you could go on is the one we're familiar with. When we have, this is this is the most used formula in ham radio. And we conveniently, the speed of light, 300 million miles per second, million meters per second, 180 million miles per second, 300 million meters per second, speed of light. Frequency we do in million hertz, megahertz, with a capital M. And on the exam, by the way, they will ask you about the M and the K. Kilo for 1,000 and mega with a capital M. If you think of frequencies, that what we mostly talk about in ham radio, in frequency, the M is capitalized, it's the big one. The K is small, it's the small one. Kilohertz is something used very often, as is megahertz, and occasionally in other realms, gigahertz. The reason for the capital M is that a small m is used for milli, a thousandth. It's the other way. So the big M for megahertz, but it's millions, and so it means that if we divide meters per second by frequency in cycles per second, we get a wavelength in meters. So 300 divided by 50 would be how many, what's the wavelength?
60. Wait, 300 and what was
Divided by 50 would be 60. So the wavelength would be 60 meters, and that's the 60-meter band. The bands are approximate, named in the whole, there's a little more, let's just say they're approximate for now, right? There's a little bit of variation with how close they are, because some of them are, we go 160 meter, 80 meter, 60 meter, 40 meter, 20 meter, and then you start getting into 17 meter and 15 meter and 12 meter. Very handy. Wavelength. What frequency do you turn the dial on the radio, the transceiver, is for frequency. So what frequency do you need to turn it to for the 30-meter band? You want to know the frequency. You see, you cover that up, and it says divide the wavelength by into 300. So it would be 10 megahertz. So you're going to turn the dial to 10 megahertz. Yeah? And that little transition, and that's definitely on the exam, but it's also really helpful in regular. In other words, if you're making an antenna for a certain frequency, you need to know the wavelength because the antenna has to be related to wavelength, and we'll come to that. So we can move on from that one. And this just to show that once we have, and this becomes important in other times that we don't need to go there, but waves actually always add up. They affect one another. If a signal, two signals are combined, which they are in radio, or even just if they are combined by being in the air at the same time, they will combine in different ways. And this long one up here, you can see that the bottom point is down here, the high point is up here, but then this one right here, it's subtracting from this, and it takes away, and you end up with a complicated form here. But that's just the fact of it is all I want to point out with that one. Let me go on. This is a picture of a frequency that is changing. Yeah, it's high frequency here and much lower frequency here, so it will sound different, and that's what's done. This is frequency that's changing, and we'll come up to that again later. Go on. Just to show you that as a picture. Now this is a picture of standing waves, and this is the one that we saw me do. Yeah, that's one full cycle. First I did a half cycle. Repeating. Now we have the full cycle, and then a harmonic is when we have two full cycles in one, 3 cycles, 4 cycles happening, and this is twice the frequency, 3 times, 4 times, and just a picture again. There's places where it's important, but all I'm trying to do now is introduce this and not go further than that with it. And next. Now, another thing, this is on the exam, the electromagnetic field is what we're dealing with, and we're using these concepts of the waveforms and measures and everything. This is, you could imagine, say the one we were talking about was this one. There's its 1 cycle, 2 cycles in the magnetic field. In electromagnetism, there's always both an electric field and a magnetic field. It's the nature. That's why it is that coil moving through the magnet and interacting there's an interaction of these two fields. It's the case that an electric field accompanies it, but remember this very odd thing, and there are a couple of other demonstrations I wanted to show but couldn't put them together well enough, this very odd thing that when you've got a wire with a current moving through it, so it's got a magnetic field around it, and what's odd is that it's not, you would expect it like the light bulb there's a wire in there with a current moving. That one there is more complicated, but imagine that one is a standard incandescent light with a wire moving through it that gets hot. And it radiates light and it radiates heat, but they're all going out from it. Everything we used to in the physical world, that's the nature. When you push something, it goes in the direction you pushed it. With electromagnetism, the magnetic force is around the wire. It's moving sideways, but it's moving sideways in an orbit, in effect. So it radiates out, but this way instead of this way. Going out from here, out, instead of like this, right? And they are, in fact, the two are at right angles. That's a mathematical fact. It'd be difficult to illustrate, but it's part of the exam. And just know the important part in one sense for us is simply that picture that this radiation, this propagation, is both electric and magnetic. For some parts of radios, the magnetic side is important. For our antennas, it's the electrical side that's important, because that's what does the radiating. Next.
Christian, question. So they're offset by 90 degrees? Is that a way to look at it?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Like this.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's in perspective. No, that's fine. That's in perspective, so it was actually, it would be nice to have another one that actually showed it that way. Yeah. Thank you. Now, this is really interesting in a funny way. This is a picture of what I was showing with the slinky. A compression, an impulse, compression, rarefaction, compression. Rarefaction means that if you've got, like if we had, it would be nice to have had somewhere another set of dots that would be, it would want to be the average between these two. This is the same thing shoved together. This one is the same thing spread apart. And it's something we never think about, again, because we're used to these simply the push with inelastic things like sticks, like a cue stick, pushes that ball. But in this case, in order for this to compress, part of it has to be thinned out. And it's a series of, this is the impulse, but this part is, this back here, for this to be shot out, this one is thinned out. And we simply, this is simply a chart of the density of the air. This is the mean, this is normal air pressure. It gets pressurized and then thinned out, and pressurized and thinned out. Next. Now, when we're trying to communicate, we're trying to, it all begins in speaking, yeah? And it's interesting that what's the medium for the transmission and reception of speech is what? Remember, it doesn't work on the moon. Air. So we're using air. Getting much message? No message. There's a problem there. So we have the medium, but with nothing else. What's the difference?
Air.
There's air, but what else?
Pitch.
Why? Vocal cords. Vocal cords are adding a tone to the air. And once we have a tone, we have the possibility of speech. Lots of tones from dogs and cats, not much speech. Yeah? And they have other ways of communicating, but it's not through speech. So there's something else involved. The tone isn't enough. So I start off, I have my vocal cords are going, and it's very hard to keep it very flat. But basically my vocal cords are going at I'm producing a certain tone, but then I'm modifying the tone. Now, one way to do that, to signal, the first part would be, mm, 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 mm. What was the signal there?
Morse code.
And in the form of short pulse, 3 short pulses, 3 longer pulses, 3 shorter pulses. So we have the possibility of encoding information. That's the first possibility there, to encode information, to modulate, add something to the simple, the tone is called the carrier in radio. So the tone is a certain frequency. So we have it would be nice to have one where we had the straight carrier, and I had one, but I didn't realize how helpful it would be. Basically, if you take one section of this, would be the carrier. The carrier gets modified, but this is the my voice. One little piece of the vibrations, the picture of the vibrations of my voice. Now remember, the tone is the simple, like this, but faster, let's say. Yeah, that's a picture of the waveform of the tone from my voice. Now I do things to modify it, like damping it down by closing my lips, or it's complicated in the mouth because there's a lot going on. But basically what we're doing is in the combination of the tone, which is the carrier, and modifying it, what we really have is, and there are pictures of that I don't have here, but you simply have it getting louder and quieter over and over and over, and it's hard to picture because it's happening so fast. But when they actually, I've seen this, and it would be good to show a video of it, but when you speak, they can actually show on an oscilloscope a picture of this variation in your voice. The important part for that is simply that we modulate it so that, it's called modulation, when we change the carrier so that the loud moment, so variations in the, yeah, I think we need to leave it there. The tone is modified in our speech so that we actually get language out of it. And it pictures something like this. The only thing that's changed, the frequency of the carrier stays the same, but it's affected by the speech so that the loud parts, and this is loud like here, it's loud, it's a matter of simply shape. Our speech is a series of different tones, and each of those tones is one group of frequencies. And so there's a change in our voice. We change frequencies and we change loudness, and that's what ends up being speech. For now, for what we're doing here, the important part is simply to realize that with amplitude modulation, AM radio, what we're doing is impressing this waveform onto the steady carrier. And so in the high points here, we've got a high amplitude. Amplitude modulation is AM. Amplitude modulation. Where it's quiet, there's a little amplitude. So this part's quiet. And in this case, where it's loud, these are closer together. The frequency is higher. the amplitude stays the same. And this is frequency modulation. I remember hearing, I got on FM radio when I was in, might have been, I had a paper route. It was either end of grammar school, it might have been. The good, I don't know if people remember AM radio, but it was full of static. And FM was completely clean. Because what happens is what makes noise, things in the atmosphere, there's a lot of atmospheric noise, they are all pulses of energy. And so when they are received, it's a pulse of energy with no content to it, just noise, a spike of noise, a series of spikes of noise, and they change the amplitude. FM doesn't pay any attention to that. It's unaffected by it. It only, when this signal is processed, it only processes it according to the frequency changes. All you need to know for that part. Next.
What's
Yeah.
the advantage of AM radio then over FM? Why
It's simpler, and FM didn't, the means, the electronics to do that to a carrier didn't exist. AM was the first thing that could be built, and you don't actually need any electronics. I had a crystal radio when I was in early grammar school, and it consisted of a coil to tune, you don't know about that yet, and a single diode, and that was it. And they used to, in the wartime, they also made them using a double-edged razor blade and a pin or a safety pin with a point sticking on to the razor blade, and that would act as a rectifier. That's all that's needed for AM.
But they still sell radios today with AM on it. What is the reason for that?
The only reason is that they exist. It's inertia. So there are radio stations heavily invested in their antenna, in their, it's hard to find a car radio now that has AM on it.
I still find them.
Yeah, they exist because there are radio stations.
My car has it.
There are AM radio stations.
Go further.
Yes, that's a good point. As it happens, there are always, that's a very good point. As it happens, there are frequency allocations by law where they agree who's going to operate where. So AM is way down here, longer wave. FM is way up here and a much shorter reach. AM, you will sometimes at night hear AM stations from the Midwest. You don't hear FM stations, so that was it.
Why you still have them on the radio.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's it. And there are those big AM stations, reach huge distances and with a big audience for that little station they would never be able to do that with FM. So great question. Okay, next.
Question, is the carrier wave for ham radio always FM?
No,
Okay.
this isn't the carrier wave,
I get it.
right?
I just-
Okay.
yeah.
But so there, we'll be going. This is called modes. AM is a mode, FM is a mode, and you hit the button again. I think we'll come to single sideband, and this is interesting. This was a development when I think it was around the 50s. It was definitely becoming more popular in the late 50s, in the early 60s. When I was in high school, I was reading in QST about this. So this is when a carrier is modified for AM, it actually gets, and this is, if you imagine, this is the carrier frequency, and this is the AM signal that's being modified in pace with a voice. Whenever that happens, it's the nature of signals. It happens, with a piano. If you hit one key, that's not the only string that vibrates. There will be others that are harmonics of it that will also start vibrating. When when a signal is imposed onto a carrier, this is an addition. These frequencies are higher and higher and higher. And this is the amplitude, this is frequency. In other words, if I have a 3,000 hertz voice signal, which is kind of mid-range, the voice is usually from 300 to 20,000. So more like 10,000 would be middle. That is besides the amplitude part, it's the nature of signals that frequency will also be added to the carrier. So what goes out will be the carrier frequency, 28,400,000, plus the frequency of the voice that's speaking it. There will be an increase of frequency as well. It's the nature of things. And there will be the opposite. There will also be a subtraction. And
is that like when you're tuning through a radio dial and you can faintly hear a signal, and then as you get closer to the right frequency, it gets louder and louder, and then it's almost perfect, and then as you go past, it gets a little weaker? Is that basically what we're looking at here?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It gets much more radical with the next thing that we're going to talk about here. In order to get this signal sent out with your message, we have to use all of this part of our electromagnetic energy, because it's the nature of the carrier that when you add to it, it also subtracts. You get two parts of the signal. You get higher frequencies and lower frequencies. That's the nature of things. And it means that this has got the same, both of these have, if you look at them, they're mirror images. They both have the same information. It's the information that you're going to translate into voice, into what you're hearing. But we're using all of this bandwidth, all of this radio signal to go out there in order to just get one part. We're going to have to eliminate this part inside the radio in order to be able to hear it. Otherwise, they subtract from each other, and you get. So we have to sort it out. So at some point, they decided, let's just get rid of that part before we send it out, so we can concentrate our energy on getting just the message out. So there's a filter in there that just takes out one set of frequencies. And it also takes out the carrier frequency, because all that is energy that doesn't have any more information. It's the same information. So we get rid of that part and we concentrate everything in one sideband, it's called. One side of the whole band. It's AM as a signal, but what we're doing is taking the meat of it, so to speak, and sending this out. It's a choice whether it's the upper or the lower sideband that is actually transmitted. And there are conventions, typically. So this is only for AM. It's a kind of AM. It's a single sideband. And the convention is that you use the upper sideband above 30 megahertz, the 10-meter band. So in the 6-meter band, you'd be using the upper sideband. In the lower frequencies, you use the lower sideband. It's just a convention. You can reverse it. You won't hear as many people, but some people just say, we don't have as much to sift through to find our friend, for instance. So we'll go the opposite way. There's no law about it, and the receivers and transmitters are both set up to do both, because it depends on what frequency. But it's more efficient, and this is almost entirely what's used these days. by far the most is this because of its efficiency. One thing about, and I don't have a recording, when you dial in single sideband, as you come up to the signal, what will happen is the person's voice will be way off tone. It'll be very high and garbled. You can hardly make out because it's so selective. You're only hearing the part of the high part of what they're saying. And then as you get closer and closer and closer, it fills out till you get, it's a different kind, because the one you were describing with the other kind of AM, it's just the volume. But this is the pitch as well and the parts of speech, because everything that's below that you don't even hear.
That's something you experience on AM radio only when you're tuning in something that higher pitch to the lower pitch, I've noticed.
Huh. I don't know about that part. But it's very striking, and learning to dial single sideband is something. Okay, next.
Christian, question.
Yeah.
What's the difference in frequencies from one carrier frequency to the other?
So they just are whatever they are. There's no difference in principle, though we'll find they're very different effects in how they are in the real world, in their propagation.
So there are no FCC requirements for, let's say you got 28.4 megahertz here. The next step up would be?
So there's an interesting question. This is the difference between GMRS and ham radio. There are no channels.
Oh.
It's a straight dial.
Okay, the reason why I'm asking is because, so there's a difference here of 3,000 megahertz. At what point would you then impede the carrier frequency of the next?
That's a very good question. And you just do it by hearing it. And it's a very good question, and where it goes is a thing called bandwidth.
Okay.
Yeah, because this takes a certain bandwidth,
Yes.
a certain range of frequencies. You will interfere any time that you're up to, when you're below this and above this, you'll interfere with the signal. But
So then
there are no rules about it.
it's a matter of tuning to the correct carrier frequency
Yeah.
to get a better strong signal.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Okay.
clearer,
A clearer signal.
especially with single sideband. It's remarkable. It'd be very cool. I wish I had a recording or brought the radio for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next. Okay, now this is modulation. This is how we take the carrier, the propagation, what's carrying energy out into the world, and modify it to carry our signal, to carry our speech, to carry our message, to get the information out there we want. Now we look at what the specifics of the carriers, what's doing this all, is in the electromagnetic spectrum. And again, we'll go quick. So this is just a picture of all the way from AM radio, high frequencies. You come to what's the frequencies of a microwave oven. Higher frequencies, infrared. Actually, heat has a frequency related with the infrared. You come to visible light. That's a very high frequency. Ultraviolet, what gives us a tan. Higher than that, X-rays. Higher than that, gamma rays that get up to nuclear radiation. Okay. Just a picture. Go on to. And again, then out of that, a subset of that is in the ham radio bands that we've talked about plenty, but going all the way from the ones that we are most familiar with, start here and move up to here. Shortwave from 3 megahertz, then in the VHF is where FM radio and TV are. Up in frequency, and this came out when I think I was in college when UHF came out. UHF TV came out. This was the 13 channels. all the channels above that were UHF. You also get to cell phones, and then you get up to some very high, super high frequency they're used in other ways. Audio is down here. There are medium frequency and low frequency. There actually is some ham activity. There are some bands in there that are allowed. It's very experimental. People just do it who are for the sport of it. Next. And again, this is just a bit on the ham radio bands and some of the other ways that these set of frequencies is used in this low, which is ground wave propagation we'll come to. It is used in radio navigation, these very low frequencies. Next we come up to radio broadcasting and locators, a regular AM radio, and we're just reaching the ham bands. 1.8 to 2 is the 160 meter band, would be right here. Up here, this is a main band, HF. Both of these are skywave, which we'll talk about soon. So we've got ham radio, amateur radio, cars and ships, planes and ships come up to very high frequency. This is our technician band. This is the 2 meter band. 2 meter band would be what frequency? 300 divided by 2. 150. Yeah. So that's the nominal band, because what we call a 2 meter band starts at 144 and goes up to 148, I think, something like that. Just under that, but in the ballpark. 2 meter. And then we're moving up into the 1.25 meter is in here. That's the second band in a tri-band radio. Ham radio, radio navigation, VHF TV, FM radio is in here at 188 to 108. Then we come up into these ultra high frequency, which is the other band that GMRS is in there. It's 450. And the ham band like it is under there at around 440 to 460, 455, something like that. It's always this is only line of sight, and we'll find out why that is. Go up much higher. Ham radio does some work in these super high frequencies, radio navigation satellites. By the way, there are also amateur radio satellites that operate in here, and a technician with a handheld radio and an inexpensive built antenna, do-it-yourself antenna, can talk to satellites, to amateur radio satellites. It's very cool. One of our guys used to do it at the field day. Okay, go on. So propagation, there's an error in there, to get after my secretary. So we begin with what we're used to with our handheld radios and VHF and UHF, which means line of sight, and that means you need to be able to see the radio that you're trying to contact, though if you note, there's a little difference there, and that is that this is the visual horizon, so this would be real line of sight. But in fact, the radio horizon comes down below that because there is some bending of the radio wave by interaction with the atmosphere. So we get a little bit beyond true line of sight with radio. Next. And then we have the next step is that there is line of sight, but there is another mode of propagation called the ground wave. And you don't have it in VHF, UHF, but in HF, there is a factor of actually hugging the ground, and a ground wave moves along over the ground, and it can go beyond line of sight. And we'll come to the rest of that next, I think. So there's another picture of the ground wave, and you can see this is reaching serious distance with HF ground wave. This is out here at, we're getting in on 1,000 miles. Okay, next. And another factor of light and light-like emanations, radiation, is that you can see this sometimes on if you can at the ocean. If you're on the rocks, and I'd love to do this. I used to live in Santa Cruz, California, and go to the ocean and up on the rocks and watch the waves breaking, but also just the interaction. And you can watch a wave actually bend around a rock. You can see the ripple actually coming like this, coming to a rock and actually bending. Yeah, it's called diffraction. And because of the diffraction, this wave isn't simply, it's from here, it should be blocked, shadowed by this, but diffraction actually bends it. This will be weaker, but it's possible to receive beyond the hill because of that diffraction. Next. Yeah, that's just the... So ionosphere is critically important for everything about radio except the VHF and UHF. For HF, and we'll see that a bit more, but the real key is simply that the sun is emitting extreme ultraviolet. That's one of the emanations from the sun, which acts on atoms in the upper atmosphere and ionizes them. Ionize means that they become electrified. And that electrical activity and free electrons, then this electrical capacity is out in the atmosphere, and something happens with that. Let's go to the next one. So this is a picture of the radiation creating the ionosphere. And what happens then is that radio waves bounce off some. There's a dynamic to it, an interesting dynamic, where the radio waves are bouncing off the ionosphere, and so the propagation can go way beyond the horizon. Next. And another thing that happens then with that is that in that ionization, there are actually layers of different kinds, characteristics of ionization. The lowest one is called the D layer, then there's the E layer, the F1 and F2 during the daytime, and the F1 and F2 are the ones that do most of the bouncing. The D layer mostly absorbs. So there's a thing about frequency and energy. There's two kinds of energy involved with radio waves. One is the power of the transmitter. Yeah? So that's what's moving the propagation itself, the radio wave itself, and the strength of the radio wave as such. There's another aspect to it that the reason consider the difference between, in the sun, the difference between getting warm and getting sunburn. Yeah? You never get burnt by the warming part of the sun. That's the infrared. That's a lower frequency. There's a higher frequency in ultraviolet, and it has another kind of energy that actually makes chemical change. That's why you get burnt by that, not by the infrared. The higher frequency has a higher energy of its own, that aspect of energy. It's more active. So the D layer, so this is a low frequency, doesn't have much energy of this kind, and it gets absorbed by the D layer. You have to have a high enough frequency to get through the D layer to the E layer. For the most, the E layer is kind of mysterious. Different things happen at different times. Mostly it doesn't have much to do with this. It makes it through the D layer, it'll make it through the E layer, and it comes to the F layers, And there's where it gets refracted if it's got enough energy in the frequency energy to get through these up to here. Then it actually goes in and gets bent and comes back around. It's not actually, strictly speaking, it's refraction instead of reflection, but effectively it's bouncing off. Now, just in the same way that high energy got it through the D layer, if it's got high enough energy, high enough frequency, it won't get stopped and bounced by the F layer. It'll go right on through. So, technician mostly working with very high frequency and ultra high frequency, those don't get stopped by the F layer. That's why you don't get this other aspect of range. They never bounce off, they shoot right on through and get lost to space. Next.
So it's not that they're weaker, it's just...
Exactly. It's really difficult to differentiate those two aspects. There's this one kind and then there's this other. In one sense, the other is more external. This is just a picture. Actually, if you could go back, because I didn't point one thing out. Can you go back easy? Page up? Okay. Notice that this picture says day and night. Yeah? This one, in the daytime, we've got the D layer. At night, the D layer disappears. The F layer combines into... These two combine into just one. They're different conditions, night and day. There's another aspect to these, the strength of the layers, the energy sort of what the layer's capability to do, especially the reflecting, is affected by other aspects of the sun. Solar flares, different kinds of solar activity, cosmic rays, those all energize these layers more. They can also get it energized to where they block transmission. Okay, so the next one is just another picture of the same thing to show it. This is the daytime side. This is the nighttime side, because it's always, this is showing from outer space, so to speak. You get a chance to see all these layers lit up by the sun and energized by the sun, and then the way they fade and change in the nighttime and propagation changes, which is something when you're working, go ahead. You pay a lot of attention to that. Are you in slide view mode?
Yes.
Okay. So this one just didn't, my own work on that messed up somehow. What's the next one? This will be the telling. Oh, okay, so this is a good picture of the different aspects of the outcomes of this bouncing. Because bouncing, if you think of especially a pool table, the way the ball bounces off of the bumper, it's a mirror image. This angle and this angle are the same, but the bouncing depends on this angle. If this angle's sharp, then you're going to be, with this sharpness, you've got this distance. With this sharpness, you've got this distance. So that's the first step of it. This is something really important in emergency radio. NIVIS, near vertical incident sky waves. So these are all sky waves, means they're going into the sky and they're interacting with the ionosphere. They're just, all of the action is from the sky. NIVIS is near vertical, right? It can be a range, but it's near vertical. And because of that, the bounce back is very close. And it's a single hop, so to speak. It's up and back, and typically it has a range of between 200 and 350 mile radius of what you reach. So when I've done that in field day, I get a lot of action from western Pennsylvania and western New York and West Virginia also, going different. Now, we can stay here just a moment. So we've got different elements of simply showing And so we've got ground wave, limited but much further than line of sight. This part is interesting. If you notice, this signal is being sent by an antenna. It's reaching up to the ionosphere. It's bouncing down, and you get a nice long signal. What happens in between? You got no signal. It's going right over. This is called the skip zone or the dead zone. Generally, skip zone is what's, but it is dead. And I've got a ham friend who is in Ghent, and he mostly works in like the 20-meter band is one of his favorites. He's never been able to reach anybody in New York State. And nobody in, it's only maybe the far reachers, mostly the neighboring states he can't reach either. Because they're all in the skips. Now his interest, the sporting aspect of it is how far can you reach somebody? And so antennas are designed to do that. They're designed not to waste energy going up where it's not going to do you any good because you're not getting out with the skip. It's just staying local, and the sport of this one kind of sport is long distance. So you skip right over all the in-between stuff. That's the importance of NIVIS, because that's the way that you can reach locally. You want to reach the neighboring states, you want to reach within your state. The other beauty of it is because it's going up and coming down, it goes over hills. Hills don't get in the way. They don't block it from line of sight. It's up and down over, so any hills within 350 miles, it'll hop over.
Do these skywaves only bounce once, or do they?
No, go
down,
next.
up
Good,
and down?
excellent question.
So before we
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So how do you can you change the skip points by changing the frequencies on your transmitter?
Great question. There's a couple of ways. Yes, and this isn't something actually I'm not familiar with, but there are different characteristics by frequency to some degree, but generally you do it with antenna design. And antenna design has a huge effect on it, and so does the elevation of the antenna.
Okay.
So this we really basically have a broader picture of the same thing, except here we're looking at all these different things. A reflected wave through the F zone probably to reach to here directly. Higher frequencies are going right on through. They're not bouncing back, so the VHF, UHF are gone. They're good for reaching satellites and the moon. And I've got a friend, a couple of friends who used to do moon bounce with their bouncing a signal off of the moon and receiving it on Earth. This is a higher frequency. Now, this is showing the different effects by frequency in terms of the distance reached. So your question about the skip, low frequency, generally shorter. This angle, this is a higher frequency, which is shorter. Lower frequency has a longer reach in this regard than the higher frequency. And here they're saying that this is also the higher frequency. The higher frequency is reaching further, so the angle is this angle is much steeper. So if you pictured this angle over here, it would be like this. Yeah? So with a lower angle, you're getting a further reach. So that'll change the skip. Yeah? Lower frequency reaches out further, you got more skip zone, dead zone. Higher frequency comes in a little closer, so you got less of a skip zone. Very big limits on it, though. Okay, here is your question, but we've got a further one, but this is what's called a skip when it bounces again. So it bounces off the Earth becomes an antenna and re-radiates it. It's actually interesting. The reason these things are curved is crazy. The way it is described in the atmosphere is that these electrons up there get their energy change. They absorb a signal and then they re-radiate it. And it's going on, and to where this thing actually, because of this re-radiation, ends up curving in there. That's really crazy. Next. And to your point, this is multiple skips. This is transmitting, asking propagation to reach Australia from Great Britain. Yeah? So there's a hop, a bounce, another bounce, and Australia come around the other way. There are some times where they've, because of, it gets wildly interesting when you go there, but if you consider the dynamic of the day-night changes, they're dynamic. They're happening, moving around the Earth. And there's a different ionospheric configuration where your signal's going from where it is where you are. And it's very complicated and interesting for those who want to go there to actually play with those dynamics when you're trying for the long distance. There are times when they have found signals that actually take the long hop, they call it. It goes more than halfway around. It's going a further distance than the other, and the signal's may be going both ways. Now, usually that will be happening with a directional antenna. But it will be because the propagations conditions are better over here, and so a stronger signal coming around here because these conditions are better than these conditions, and so it doesn't do so well trying to go this way. Next. So this is the same picture. This is just giving another diagram of the same fact, daytime, nighttime, and the way that things change. And we can just go on from this one. And that's it on the basics of propagation, the ionosphere, conditions of the ionosphere, that very important in HF radio. Any questions on that? Yeah.
I'm not asking you to answer to solve a problem for me, but I'm just asking this question as like just so that I understand the construct of how this would be solved.
Yeah.
And it may just be because I haven't done enough of the reading, but based on like what we've done so far, if I had a ham radio, I'm here like in Hudson, and I have friends down in New York City, in Connecticut, I've got a friend in Ohio, like friends in the valley, like over in Massachusetts, like on the other side of the Berkshires. And if I was like, okay, who can I communicate with and how am I gonna think about doing this? Would I be like starting out that problem? I know that there may be like repeaters, right? So that would be like just kind of going like this, like a cell phone.
Linked repeaters.
And then there's all of this stuff about like there are mountains, and then they're like day and night, and like bouncing off, and like which frequency we're using. So would I be doing this as like kind of a math problem? Like a kind of mapping and math problem to figure out like how am I gonna reach that person? Or would I be like, would we just be experientially trying to reach each other somehow by like going up and down dials? Like what would be the like, I'm not asking you to say like, here, where's your friend and like exactly whatever. I'm just sort of saying like, where would we start to get into this problem? Since
it's a great question. It's a really important question because we're so spoiled by cell phones. And there's a couple of different sides to it. The first one happens to be that it sounds to me like everything that you happen to be talking about is within 350 miles.
Okay.
Which means NIVIS would probably reach them directly.
Okay.
So, UHF and VHF wouldn't come near without linked repeaters. So there's that kind of meta decision making, and it's really important. The other aspect, when you get practical about it, is there's times when you want to reach them because you want to say hello or you got a message and it's not important. It's just part of being friends. Other times when it is important, and you might want to consider what would it take for reliable, of what level, and what do I actually need? Because networks and passing messages is a really important part of resilience in radio. The ARRL, the American Radio Relay League, note the name, Radio Relay League. Why did it come about? Because you could not get a message, a radio transmission from the East Coast to the West Coast. Couldn't be done. And the only way to get it was by relaying messages. And it's an important part of networking for emergency communications, to develop ways to pass messages. So that aspect of networking is another part of the picture you're describing there. Your first line would be, there are only so many linked repeater systems. Is there a linked repeater system? If a decision tree, can I make it with VHF, UHF through a linked repeater system? That's concrete. You have to go and look up various publications will help. Actually, I don't know of ones that does a good job with linked repeaters, but there probably is some websites that's doing some of that work. And then AMRON is a very interesting organization of networking. Yeah. So,
Christian,
yeah, please.
You might have just answered this, but there's a question that came up about a minute ago, I think, related to that. What about 50 miles? What would it take? So it's the same thing. NIVIS is probably the answer?
Well, NIVIS is one answer, but 50 miles is certainly within repeater range.
Okay.
If there's a repeater, and it's pretty common, NOBARC, for anybody around here, NOBARC has a 130-mile radius from the Pittsfield area, Mount Greylock. So linked repeaters and repeaters, 50 miles is easily within repeater. So it gets a little more subtle than that I have to go. And that is that it depends on, if the repeater's in between the two of you, 25 miles is a pretty good range for a repeater. So you kind of, if the repeater's between the two of you, then you can make it 25 and 25, may well be able to reach repeater, may not. It's kind of on the edge. Depends on your own conditions as well, hills and things like that. And it's not common for a repeater to be halfway in between where you want to reach, so that's more limits there. So NIVIS is a sure thing, though NIVIS has some vulnerabilities to atmospheric conditions. And linked repeaters where they're available, but that's where you get that's ground wave. Ground wave would reach that, and 6 meters is an interesting band I'm not as familiar with, but that could be within 6 meter range. I don't know enough on that myself. I really wanted to, maybe we should take a break. What do you think? So I want to get practical now. The other kind of practical, the physically practical.
5 minute, 10 minute break? Okay. All right, recording stopped. Mike, I think one of the problems was that cable.
Yeah.
Once they changed it, then everything started working.
Oh, wow.
So we can hook up your camera.
Perfect.
If you want, and then this way it can follow Christian. Let's try that.
Give her another shot. Shut this down.
And Christian, I'm only using one camera. Hudson, she organizes these meetings, radio group meetings, where we talk about our radios and stuff like that. She's been asking me about when she can have another meeting. It might be a while because after this, I'm taking a break. So, but when we do have that meeting, I'll include you.
Okay.
Bring your radio. Christian's here. Cody's usually here. They're here. I mean, we're all here, and then we can ask all kinds of questions and go over things. If you don't mind waiting, I don't know how long. I don't know when that will be.
Okay. And otherwise, I can just kind of try to do it myself, and then you guys sometimes go online on Wednesday night. So if I somehow got it working, I could listen into that.
Yes, you should be able to hear us if you're on the frequencies. This will be channel 26, I think it is.
Okay.
16,
Oh, but it's repeater 16.
repeater 16.
They're gonna
But
send
it
you-
needs,
Okay. I'm not trying to bother anyone.
Okay.
it needs the tone. You know how that GMRS group got started, and as a group was when I'd done a bunch of workshops, and Dorothy heard about that and asked to meet me to talk about it. She missed the workshops, and we met at Rev and sat and talked about it, and that's what got the. She's a good organizer, social person, and got a lot happening. But I'd be glad to meet you sometime at Rev and look at programming your.
Oh, okay.
You know, it's. I'm going to mention it here. We're not going to have to. Mario, I completely understand your need for a break. But in the simplified mode, since we've had a number of requests for my offering to have one more session which isn't technically oriented, it's exam oriented. Would it be possible to use the room and possibly in some way, low-key way, offer it to the people out in the world on Zoom?
Well, one thought is, I mean, if you want to do it on a Saturday when the library is open, obviously you can talk to Thea, the director, and set up a meeting. I'm sure if the room is available, they'll let you
Yeah.
have it. But obviously on a Sunday, the library is closed.
Yeah,
Right, so,
that's why I'm speaking to you.
yes, well, fortunately I have a key.
Well, the question is whether you have an interest in continuing this one more time in a lower key way for that exam-oriented.
Well, not anytime soon.
Okay, I hear you,
Okay.
and I don't blame you. It's going to take me weeks to recover. It does every time I teach. You know, I did the homeschool. Anyway, we got to move along here because we want to talk about the practicalities, and we want to begin with the handhelds. And because almost all of the uses handhelds is with repeaters, we need to understand repeaters. And I gave the basic picture the day we began this, but we need to talk a little bit more about it now that we know a little bit more about radios, propagation, and frequencies. This is a diagram of a repeater system. And remember I talked about how incredibly sensitive a receiver has to be. Now, a repeater is going to receive a signal and send out a signal, yeah, on the same antenna. What would happen if remember that 5-watt light on a handheld frequencies, let's say it goes 20 miles. Can you imagine trying to read by that light at 20 miles away from here? It won't do it. You would have to like use night vision goggles that were very strong to be able to amplify it enough to get it. And what would happen if then you turned on that light bulb right beside those night vision goggles? Yeah. So if the transmitter fed this antenna, which is connected to the receiver, it'd blow it apart. What is done in order to solve that problem is that there is one frequency that is the receive frequency. And there's another frequency. So the transmitter transmits to the antenna. The receiver is connected to the same antenna. It's protected by the duplexer. The duplexer is a super filter that won't let through any signal but something pretty close to the transmitter signal. So the transmitter, there is an offset between the receive frequency and the transmit frequency. On the 2 meters, it's 0.6 megahertz, 600 kilohertz. So the receive, this is what you would tune your radio to. You tune your radio to, say, 146 megahertz. The transmitter is not if the transmitter transmitted 146, it would blow out the receiver. So what it transmit at is 146.6 megahertz. That's the offset. And this duplexer is able to filter out that frequency so it does not go on to the receiver, it just goes to the antenna. So you're transmitting at 146.6 megahertz, and that's what goes out to the antenna and gets transmitted.
So you're basically talking about, like, you don't want to just, like, scream in your own ear. Is like
Exactly, exactly.
all for this?
Yeah, yeah. Now, the receive audio, so you're receiving and you want, it goes to the transmitter and the transmitter's transmitting at the same time. So it's a direct pass-through for the transmitter. The duplexer filters it out, but we also need to control things here. There are a few needs, legal and technical needs. One is that FCC requires that that any radio give out its call sign every 10 minutes. The controller has in it a device that will send the call sign out. Typically it's done Morse code. That meets the requirement. So when you're on a repeater, you'll all of a sudden hear this Morse code signal going out. The controller is also what would have the tones. So the controller won't pass through the signal if it's set up with a transmit tone. It won't pass it through to the transmitter unless it hears that tone. We'll be talking about tones called subaudible tones. There is a tone. There are about 60 available, and they're below our hearing. A whale would hear them just fine, an elephant would hear them just fine, but we can't hear them. But the controller listens for it, and it won't pass it through. It also turns the transmitter on. The receiver is always on. The transmitter only comes on when it's carrying a signal. So it won't turn the transmitter on, and it won't pass the audio through until it receives that tone. If it's set up with a tone. It doesn't necessarily have a tone. There are ones without it. We used our repeater at the beginning with no tone, and the GMRS repeater with no tone. So that's part of what the controller does. So the critical part there is the offset. The offset can be in either direction. It could be plus or minus. I said this was 600. It depends on where you are in the band, in the 2 meter band, how much the offset, whether the offset is plus or minus. And it's all written down. It's all legalese. You look it up. That's part of what the repeater book was for that I showed you here, or repeater book online to tell you whether it's a plus or minus. There's conventions for ranges of frequencies, but there's about 6 of them. So it would be 146.6 or 145.4, depending on whether it's plus or minus. So that's offset and tone. Those are the critical matters. And next one?
So I just
Yeah,
to be clear,
please, sure, absolutely.
I think I got this picture. But let's say I'm communicating with Eckhart. We're both receiving 146 megahertz. I transmit, it goes to the duplex, which feeds the antenna. Eckhart receives it. When he then replies, it gets to that antenna, and then that's how I get.
He won't receive it on that frequency.
Well, the antenna will pick up his response, and then it goes to the duplex, which would then take the carrier over
His
to
re- the-
146.6.
But if, unless I'm misunderstanding, the key point is that when what you send to him
Yes,
on 146,
yes,
he does not receive that on 146. That's what is the device is set up with the offset, otherwise it blows out the antenna.
but his radio is dialed to 146.
Then he won't hear you.
You send on
That's
one and
the
receive on
the both the transmitter and the receive are aware of the offset. He will be listening. You generally when frequencies are talked about on it's very great, very important question. When frequencies are talked about on repeaters, they're talking about what you turn your dial to hear the repeater.
Receiver.
Okay,
And the transmitter will transmit at the offset frequency.
okay,
So the transmitter is keyed to the frequency dial for the receiver. It's keyed to that, but it puts in the offset.
okay,
So 146, he's listening to you at 146. You will be transmitting, it's the other way. When he's at 146, that's after the offset.
right, right.
Yeah. So, but in the most ham radio handhelds have automatic offset. So when you put in the receive frequency, it will change the transmit receive frequency to the standard offset. And there will be a place where, in case somebody's using reverse offset, which is legal, the conventions that'll make it easier on everybody. But some repeaters will be set up with reverse offset. It'll go the other direction, and then you have to manually do it. Some radios, like the UV5R, doesn't have automatic offset. You have to program in both the receive frequency and the transmit frequency.
Okay, thanks.
So this is a picture of the same thing, and just showing that this one is set for frequency A, so it's receiving on frequency A when he transmits. And I missed it. When his radio will transmit at the offset frequency. Yeah? Because the same thing has to happen. The system has to let through the offset, the duplexer. Funny that it's not in there. It's a good thing we had the other. The duplexer will only let through that particular frequency, the offset frequency. So he is transmitting on the offset frequency. The system receiving B and then transmitting on A, which is what this one is listening to. That frequency A goes all around, both radios pick it up.
So, just so I understand, okay, so I'm trying to talk to my friend. Let's say there was no repeater, let's say we were in line of sight.
Different thing, right?
Okay,
That's-
well, I thought that it might be like.
That's
the
called
same
simplex.
concept, but- Okay, so I dial so that I can listen. So whatever my numerical thing is what I'm listening on. So let's say it's 146. To communicate,
You know where we need to pause right there?
what's
If you
that?
don't mind. We need to pause there to understand if you are going to reach your friend without a repeater, that's called simplex.
And do we
And you have to-
146?
Yes,
Okay. And
Exactly.
then if there's a repeater in between us and I'm on 146, does that mean, have I chosen 146 because that's what the repeater decides, or have I chosen that because what my friend is also on 146?
the latter. You two choose
Okay,
what
it's
you
still
want.
the same thing, it's whoever is your destination you're matching to.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
And when the receiver hears that it won't, the repeater hears that it won't do anything. If it's a repeater with no tones, it wouldn't do anything there because it's listening for a 146.6. The repeater is. So it doesn't respond to your 146. It's not listening for that. But if your friend knows it, you use simplex and you go direct, no offset. But you have to set your radio for that, because otherwise, that's something that's a part of programming the radio, is to know about that part, and we'll have to we'll just touch on programming. So this is the basic part that we need about repeaters. Now, I want to go to some radios. One thing quickly I want to point out, because, oh my God, the first time I tried to charge my first handheld radio, what a stupid struggle it was. And actually, could I borrow your
Which one?
right? No, the other one.
No, the just
Yeah.
GMRS? Okay.
Yes. Wonderful. I brought the wrong. I was going to show you this on my other radio, and I brought the wrong charger. So these are made with slots and grooves so that when the radio's in here, it's held against the contact. So it contacts here to charge the battery, and contacts in here, so they connect to one another. The reason for the slots is to hold it against the back there. I didn't know anything about that. And I'm trying to put this thing in here, and it's falling all over the place. And I mean, I went on and I have not seen a manual that mentions that. And I've got a lot of handheld radios because I got a lot of them for the GMRS work. And I got a half a dozen ham ones. None of them mention that. So you've got a slot in here, and you've got bumps in here. You guys know it already. You've got bumps in here. They've got a match, and this basically is pushing this back against the back, and it's usually also at a slant so that it will help lean against there. The other nice thing about it, though, is that, we'll get into this, but everybody should have a spare battery. And once we take this off, the slot is actually on the battery.
Oh, so you can charge it?
You can charge it when it's not on the phone.
Always switching the batteries from the phone.
Well, we don't have extra batteries. So.
Yeah. It's really, if you think about it, it's really essential to get the extra battery. Though in principle, an extra power supply is really important, but there are different ways to supply the power. I just want to mention then a few things about the radios that I mentioned before, but to remind you, looking at the controls of the radio. The first one is depending on the radio, if they've got one or two knobs, one knob will be the on-off and volume control. The other one, if it's got a second one, will dial frequencies or memories. So that's something we need to talk about, memories. And if it's this, for instance, in these, the higher grade ham radio handhelds will also have a squelch dial. I talked about that earlier, and oddly enough in here, it's protected enough we're not getting interference. Okay, so those most basic controls, one thing you have to be able to do is control the volume, and you need to be able to control what frequency you're working on. And with a repeater, that will be the receive frequency, the nominal frequency of the repeater. And then very often, certainly in this is a single line display. In both of those, there are two different lines of display. And the upper one is called the A, and the lower one is the B, and there are different ways that it's used depending on how you program it. You can whichever, if it's two lines, there will be a triangle beside each of the two lines, usually on the left side. And that triangle point is the one which is active. And you control that with an A-B button. When you push the button, it'll switch to whichever one it's not on. If it's on A, it'll go to B. If it's on B, it'll go to A. You then can have your radio set up that you're simply working as normal on A, and you want to listen to a particular station on B. Listen for somebody a friend transmitting on that, or an emergency on that. You want to operate your radio with a lot of choices, but you really want to listen on that one. So that's the A-B function. And then there are, very important is the memory function. And that's a little bit complex, but in principle, it's just to understand. There will be a button that is, in this one it's V/M. I think on that one it might be VFO/MR. So one stands for variable frequency oscillator, or the V is variable, and the M or MR is memory. So what happens is that when you program a radio for a particular repeater, that repeater has a receive frequency, it has an offset, so it's a different transmit frequency. It has a tone, it may have a tone, it may have a transmit tone, and usually if it has a transmit tone, it will also have a receive tone, sometimes not. So those are 4 settings for one repeater. You may well be, if you're in an area, there are a good couple of dozen repeaters around here worth having programmed for. If you travel, there'll be a whole nother set of repeaters. It's laborious to program those settings. You can do it from the keyboard, one at a time, a lot of steps. It's one thing, it's hard enough, it can be interesting to do it from the keyboard, definitely. But when you get multiples, it's a drag. So there are 2 ways to program it. First principle is, once you've got those in, you've got the radio set up for those, you can save those to memory. So there is a memory in there, a memory channel, and a lot of times the radio will call it channel mode, where channel mode is memory. I think the Baofangs say channel mode. Channel and memory are the same thing, and there are a set of memory slots. And like the UV5R, I think is 199 memory channels, which is a lot. But the others have 1,999. Memory's cheap, and it's another selling point. To learn how to save them to memories and to think yourself, how do you want to organize your memories? You can organize them by locale, by type, different ways you might organize it. A good thing is that when you put the radio in memory mode, memory MR is memory recall, that's what it actually, the M's there, I think in those it's MR, which means memory recall, and mine is just M, but it's not memory like go put it in the memory or activate the memory. It just reads what's stored in the memory. It recalls into the radio what's in that memory. All the settings are recalled into the radio when you hit that memory number. So when it's in MR or M, your dial, if you have 2 dials, this one has a dial for memory, going for channels and frequencies and everything else, stepping through. The others have up and down arrows. Yeah? Most of the Chinese radios have up and down arrows. So that's just move. What you'll be doing, the screen will show you the memory channel number. And typically what it will show you, the main display will be a number, the frequency, the received frequency is what the screen will show. But if you look over on the right, in a small letters is the memory channel that you're on at that moment. So you can scroll through simply by hitting the up arrow or the down arrow and move through these different readings. And each time, so if you know what frequency. The other thing is that the nice thing about the two-line radios, most of them, not all of them, you can you can have the frequency showing, and on the other line you can actually have alphanumeric characters to name that channel. It's wonderful. So then you're scrolling until you see Aries CC for Columbia County, or what Orange County, or Nobark, Nobark 1, or Nobark, I don't know, usually there's 6 to 7 letters and numbers that are available, which is really helpful. But at the same time, you're going through until you see what you want. The other thing is that in memory, you can, I mentioned the scan function goes in and goes through a range of frequencies or a range of memories. So you can turn the radio on, hit memory, into the memory mode, and then scan, and it will go through your stored memories, and it will stop when it comes to a station that it can hear. It'll present that to you, and then you can have the radio set up so that either it flat out stops there, or it pauses briefly with you time to hit the press the talk button, and then it will lock on that one. And then I think there's another setting for waiting longer to give you a chance. So it either stops, it waits a long time, or it waits a short time. But the scan function is wonderful in that way because you can, you pick up what you can actually reach. Something I want to, I guess the next important thing to talk about on the handhelds is the antenna. And there's a concept that's really important about antennas. It's called aperture. And I think I'm going to go over here. And basically that is a stick antenna like this or like that. Where are my other ones? Right here. All of these are, well, no, one's a dipole there. The aperture is, an aperture in a camera is what the light comes through. And depending on how open the aperture is, how much light comes through. Yeah? So a longer antenna has a wider aperture. You have radio energy coming toward the antenna. The more antenna there is, the more of that energy it's able to receive. The other energy goes right on by. So the length of the antenna is important.
It's not the length, it's not the tall point, it's the length in total.
The aperture is the total length.
Okay.
Height's another factor that's really important.
Okay.
But to begin with, the concept of the aperture is especially important with these low power radios. And, interestingly, in our ham club, we have a group of us in the emergency radio service area, ARES, and we have been doing exercises with handhelds and various kinds of antennas. I think I mentioned one of the times that there was an event, obstacle course for horse and carriage, horse and buggy club, and we did radio duty for them. And there were a number of people from the club who were experienced operators, but their experience was in HF radio, not handhelds. And they were not able to work this event in a normal fashion because their antennas were the so-called rubber ducky that comes with the radio, and they didn't have the concept of aperture. In their antennas that they're using, they're built in other ways, other aspects of it. Really, the first thing it's just fundamentally important. The first thing to do is get an extended antenna. Makes a huge difference. What we had to do in that event was that there were people out in the woods where this event was happening who could hear them because they were close and had an extended antenna. So they would hear this person who I couldn't hear. I was net control. I couldn't hear them, but they could, and they would then relay the message to me. So when you're considering getting a radio and on a budget, you've got to consider the price of an extended antenna, which is typically $25, $21, $25, and then shipping to get it there. This one happens to be one of my favorites. Partly, this is something that you can get to put your handheld antenna onto to be able to put it on the roof. Handy upgrade. This is a Signal Link antenna by Signal Stuff, which makes that wonderful site that I talked about there. This is one of theirs. It's dual band, 2 meter and 70 centimeter antenna. It's $25. Actually, right now, they have free shipping for if you spend $50. So if two people get together and each buy one, or a family buy, well, you've already got a long one, but anyway, it's more important to have the extended antenna than it is to have a next grade radio. You got to take your budget, subtract the extended antenna, and then you've got the budget for the radio. I think Anya was talking to me about this.
And that thing, like you can put that onto this, but you can take it off and put it onto that, and then the other end of that is going onto your battery or going into some other part of the car.
Great question. It goes to your radio.
Okay.
Right where your antenna would screw in, that just goes in.
So one of the things that I didn't mention about this, because the first time I ordered an antenna, I got the wrong one because I've worked as a plumber quite a bit and in hardware as well. And let's see, where's my, this one. Yeah. So in plumbing, so we've got, these are, by the way, called SMA fittings. There are different kinds of coax. This is a very, very thin coax, the one that I just showed you, wherever that, this one. This is a very, very thin coax. I've got a couple of samples you could pass around. This is coax, very important concept. This is fundamental to everything having to do with the radio. This is how the signal gets from the transmitter to the antenna, and to antenna to the receiver. And it is called coax because it is coaxial in its form, in that the signal wire is in the middle and it's surrounded by insulation, which is also the other wire for the signal. For electrical transmission, you have to have two wires. So the shield is the other one. This happens to be a high grade of, this is thin wire coax. This is called RG8X. There are other designations that are the same size, other varieties, but this is the most common designation. This is a PL for plug 259. That's a typical one for this kind of connect. It's the most common in ham radio. And I've opened this one up. This has a double shield. It's a low loss cable. It's got this outer woven shield, and then it's got foil wrapped all around, and then there's an insulator, and then the signal cable. And this is it with a 259. And that is good for HF work. It's okay for VHF and UHF, like GMRS and the 2 meter stuff, if it's short distances, no more than 25 feet. For longer runs, you need this heavier cable because it's lower loss. There's some signal is always lost through a cable by radiation. This is RG8, larger and lower loss you need for higher frequencies for sure. Now, so this is an SMA connector. That's a HF connector or PL259. So looking at these radios, I had this radio. It's my first handheld, and I ordered an extended antenna for it, and it came back wrong. It wouldn't fit on this. It came back like this. Doesn't work. Why did I do it, and what did I do wrong? You look at this as a plumber, or go to a hardware store, and this is called a male fitting because it screws into a female fitting. So in plumbing, this is a male fitting. But in electrical work, in radio work, what is of primary interest is the conductor connector, the wire inside in the middle. And if you look into this, I could pass it around, I could pass both of these around. If you look into this, you'll find a socket for the wire to go into. So it's a female, because it's receptive. And if you look down inside this one that I thought was a female, you'll find the wire sticking out. So when you order some like signal stuff is very nice in that they have a drop down. They help you find the right connection. They have a drop down for manufacturer and then a drop down for radio model, and you can usually find it, and then they will get you the right one. If you, however, don't have the right one and still want to use the antenna or want to swap the antenna between different models, different kinds of radios. This is a gender changer fixture, right? It screws into the male and provides a female. Yeah, it's actually, both of them are female, but it will screw into the one and then it's male at this point. So that allows me to use the same antenna on a couple of different radios, or when I grab the wrong antenna for the radio, if I've got that uncovered. Extended beyond the beauty, one of the differences between an FRS, the bubble pack walkie-talkies at Walmart and the drugstore even, you can't take the antenna off of that. You can't put extended antenna on it, but you also can't connect it to coax. So the next step that I recommend whenever it's affordable is a mag mount antenna, right, which gets you out of the shielding of your car. The metal shielding blocks the radio waves. Whatever gets out will be because it's able to go through the glass. So you're way ahead by getting this up on the roof. But also look at the aperture of this one. Yeah? And this is a dual band antenna. This is the coax. It's thinner coax, as you can see. There will be some number on it. I don't know what it is. And it will, in this case, it's common, has a PL259 connector on it, which won't go into your radio. But this is an adapter that goes into the PL259 and transitions through some very thin coax into an SMA connector. And this is another gender changer that I happen to have on this one. Right? So this can be used to go either kind of handheld. So these come with a length of coax long enough to go from the back of the car into the front. And then some of them actually come with the SMA on it, and more commonly it's this, and you need the adapter.
Difference, obviously it's a different length, but the difference between this and the one that you showed before, which is like this little external one, right? What's the difference between those things?
This little one here?
Yeah.
Good question. That one is designed to take an antenna that you happen to already have that fits on your handheld.
Okay.
So it's just a way to get some more utility out of it without spending this money.
Okay. Okay.
But it will have that in relation
so all
to.
that is basically this with like a shorter.
Yeah,
Because
that's right.
you just took this thing off and you just
Yeah.
stuck it onto there.
Yep.
Got it. Okay.
Yep. So this one has much more aperture. The other fitting would be like this. I happen to have, somehow I don't see the one, but this is called a barrel connector. This is another one. This is used to splice two pieces of coax together. So it's actually that one that I passed around, the heavy coax, has a barrel connector holding the ends together. If you want to stretch out your coax, then you screw both of those fittings into the barrel connector. Yeah, there it is. This is a barrel connector that's called a bulkhead fitting, and it's so that you can mount it on a piece of sheet metal and connect both ways. So one could be inside the house and the other is outside the house. And in fact, an important element in considering these things it will be the next step. So wait a moment. Yeah.
2 online questions.
Yeah.
Are the extra antennas interchangeable with other radios, or
Yes.
are they radio specific?
They are not radio specific. The only there are certain specificities, and that is that a radio will be built for a band. So that's the main specificity. So any 2-meter antenna will work on any 2-meter radio.
Okay.
The one thing is, though, to be aware of what I was just talking about, that you have the right connector fitting, but you can always have an adapter for that.
Okay, and the second question, can I use a HF antenna with SMA adapter to connect to a male SMA on a Bofang for better transmission and receive more signal?
No. In other words, the question really is, can I use an antenna that's designed for one frequency on a very different frequency? The point probably being that this first one has a much bigger aperture, but we haven't been able to talk about tuning, and it's fundamental to all of radio, the tuning part. Everything is frequency specific. So a 2-meter radio has got to have a 2-meter antenna. There is a little bit of overlap with like a 2-meter antenna will work to some degree with a 70-meter antenna because they're harmonics, but not real well, and HF won't even begin to work with the others.
So we have a follow-up question?
Yeah.
So the question was answered, but is there any tuning involved with using a longer aperture?
So there's always tuning involved with an antenna. It's a very good question. It's not the length in the abstract. The longer one always has a better aperture, but the antenna, remember the standing wave. The standing wave, all the way back at the beginning of this, the standing wave is a critical point to understand antennas. The standing wave means that all of the energy, it's easier to think about with a transmission, but it's the same thing with receive. When you have that standing wave, that's only because that there's a certain distance here, and when I wave this, there are only specific frequencies where the standing wave there's only one frequency where the single wave will occur. Double that, there will be a double, so a full cycle. Triple that, 1.5 cycles. They're all multiples of this resonant length. The resonant length is a wavelength, a single wavelength, but typically the most common antennas are half wavelength antennas. And then there's a half wave antenna typically has a quarter wave side connected to the feed, the center conductor of the coax, and another quarter wave connected to the shield, making the full circuit. That's the most common basic antenna, half wave dipole, because there was called resonant at the design frequency. If you're off resonance, you lose everything. It just is noise. In fact, there's a thing called standing wave. There's a very important factor you'll hear about a lot in radio. It's called standing wave ratio. Standing wave ratio talks about how exact the match is, the resonance of the antenna and other things that are connecting to it. If it's not resonant, then remember the reflection that came from that slinky? It bounced back. Well, that happens with any signal. The bouncing back, when I waved the slinky, always had that reflection. When that reflection was right in time with the impulse, then we had a nice, even, high energy pulse with a high amplitude. When we're off frequency, this amplitude will reduce because the energy isn't reinforcing itself. It's like on the swing, you're not kicking at the right moment to add to what you've got already. So this reflection is adding to it. If it's adding to it perfectly, then you get the strongest signal, and also you're able to receive most efficiently. When you're off resonance, then you're off efficiency. And the further off you are, the less the efficiency is. So the aperture part has to be in step with these resonance elements. There are some places where there's sort of another aspect, like a 5/8 wavelength is one good wavelength for an antenna. But I think that probably speaks to that question. So this was the other connector, and I mentioned now we've gone through the element. I would say that this was the next step with a high aperture is this. This is not only good for being able to use it in your car. If you're going traveling, or if there's a situation where you need a radio in motion, you've got one. You've got a much better antenna than the extended one. But in addition, this is perfectly usable in the home. This will greatly increase your transmission. And for the most part, these VHF and UH radios are pretty good about transmitting through walls and receiving through walls. They're pretty good at it. The UHF is even better at that. So you can put this on a cookie sheet. It needs a quarter wavelength on this is about 7 inches. So these 14, 15 inch size. It's not necessarily exact. A standard cookie sheet or a standard file cabinet, that kind of thing, is great for using this in the house.
How much is it?
How much for one of these? About $35. You want to look when you're, the difference is that some of them will be, when you're looking in the catalog, some of them will actually require a base as a separate purchase. One of the ones I have out there has that. So you want to watch for that. You want to watch for what's on the other end of the coax, whether it's SMA or this, just to be aware of. And then there's shipping, but that's a typical price. I've seen them for less. This is a dual band. I also on the car have a 3-band there for the ham. Next couple of other antennas for that. This is a Ed Fong antenna. This is one of the most elegant of the stick antennas for 2 meters, and I think he has a 2 and a 3-band antenna in the ham bands, and he has one in GMRS frequencies. And actually, the VHF will work well on the ham bands. What does this run, Mario? You remember?
$40, something like that, maybe.
Yeah, somewhere probably around $40. The way he sells this is a guy who is a very high-level engineer and professor at Stanford, and he makes these himself and his daughter and a few friends. And in order to cut down shipping costs, what they sell you is a little rolled up the insides of this. And you have to buy this piece of particular kind of PVC that you can get at Home Depot. And it's a very good step up.
What is the last name?
This is an Ed Fong, F-O-N-G antenna.
And can I just add?
Yeah, because Mario has one.
He's open to answer any kind of questions you have. He's so great to work with. He really is.
Neat guy. And you know, it's so unusual in one way that goes because, as I said, this is extremely elegant design he has in here. And in terms of what Mario, it's another element of it that he has that combination and the social sense. He custom tunes every one of these. There's not a lot to that because the design has already got the tuning in it, but the physical realities of different insulations on this batch of wire or something, he actually tunes the last little bit for every one that he sends out. I will probably come across it. I'm looking for, here it is. No, I'm looking for the roll-up antenna. This is slightly damaged at the moment. There it is. That gave it away. 2 things I was looking for. This is a Yagi antenna made with tape measure, old tape measures. Very flexible, but a Yagi is a very directional antenna. These are what's called omnidirectional. It's like a light bulb. They heat the whole space. They radiate the whole space. The electric field, electromagnetic field is in the whole space. This is directional. It's fed on this element. And then this is a director which tends to shape the field of the transmission, and this is a reflector which does the same thing. It's sized differently, and the resonances are such that in a very sophisticated side of electromagnetism, this one tends to reflect the energy, and this one tends to direct the energy. They're all 3 different lengths. There are also multi-element ones of this. This is used, is especially handy in fox hunts going. I built this one because I had noise interference on my radios. And with this, you can go out and listen to, this especially happens with sometimes people, appliances is one source. My photovoltaics on the house is another source, but especially power poles. A lot of power poles are, it's when they're defective. And you report it to the company and they come and fix it. I would mention that this is one example. These are called hose clamps, and they are the ham's friend. There's so many places where you use these. You can for building antennas. So that's a directional, so the thing to think about with this directionality, even this is called a gain antenna. And when you're buying antennas, they will list the gain of the antenna. And that's like having an amplifier on it, in a way. Especially in transmission. It's the easiest way to think about it with transmission. And one picture that can help with that, and I brought one, but I'm not, maybe I'll do it anyway. It won't take long. So this is a basic imaginary antenna. And this is actually called an isotropic antenna. It's out in space, and it's just filling space. It's round, even though it's a little bit lopsided. Imagine it being round. I probably shouldn't have put quite as much air in it, but I'll give you the same idea. Maybe it'll get exciting. It's simply that the volume of this, yeah, I should have made it a lot less. You'll have to imagine. The volume of this represents the power of the transmission. Yeah? And whatever you do with it's easy to misunderstand antennas. There's no antenna cannot increase the power of your radio. Yeah? It's just helps get the signal out. It doesn't change the power, but it can change the direction of the power. So if I take this part right here, which is going in a sphere, and I change the shape, notice the shape. It should have been even lower air pressure. But just take a look at this is the range that this signal reaches with this amount of power. Yeah. Now I'm going to change the antenna so that it doesn't send so much energy up in the air. I'm not trying to talk to airplanes in this instance. Hot air balloons, birds, not my interest. I want to reach sideways. So an antenna that has gain, what it does typically, right, is simply, if you look at the rate, this distance here, and it's not being a good example because it's too small, but again, just the fact of the change is the principle. So when I do this, it's reaching further sideways. It's reaching further sideways because it's not going up there. And a higher gain antenna will get this flatter and flatter and flatter. And what happens with the Yagi is that it's going out this way. There's always some in back as well. But it's taking, in other words, this was the range of the Yagi, of the antenna by itself, or the nominal antenna. This is all the range is. Now it's actually twice, because this one from my point of origin to here, that was the range in a given direction. Now the range is out here. It's twice as far because I'm directing all the energy where I want it to go. So that's called gain. And as I mentioned, the most common basic, These are actually dipole antennas, even though I've only got one pole. That's why it's got to be on a piece of metal, because the metal is the other pole electrically. Yeah? So the feed wire goes into the antenna. The ground it's using a coupling. Capacitance coupling is for what it's worth. This is close enough to the metal that it will serve as the ground. It's called the ground plane.
So why do they specify the metal
No.
piece for this one if you can also put it on the car, which is massive?
Yeah, and it doesn't change it much. It can help a little bit more than that, but basically it just needs the fact of a quarter wave. Now, for the 2 meter part of this, in fact, quarter wave, so that's a 2 meter is almost 7 feet. So half wave is 3.5 feet, quarter wave is 1 3/4 feet. So, for the 2 meter side of it, it would be better to have bigger than a cookie sheet. When I mentioned the cookie sheet, that's especially for GMRS, and it would be for the UHF here. It will work with a cookie sheet. Also, in today's cars, you can't always find, it's hard to find a flat surface that's metal. A lot of it's fiberglass. So this is and there is also, I just brought it here, this is a roll-up antenna. Somewhere here. There it is. This is a, sorry. This you could say is a next level of antenna. This is called a J-pole. And this is about a 2 meter. This happens to be a little bit longer. It's actually I think it's the weather radio frequency, this particular one. So it's a little bit longer. No, it's a little bit shorter. So this is the main antenna, and that's the aperture. And this is something that is a matching function. An antenna needs to, there's a factor with antennas that has to do with matching a certain factor called impedance of the coax and radio with that of the antenna. And those are electrical characteristics that have to do with frequency and other matters. And in order to match this electrically with the coax, that's what this part of it does. So it's better than, more efficient than a simple, it also doesn't need a ground plane. And that's one of the main uses for it. I don't know that it's more efficient than that, but it doesn't need a ground plane. And this is a J-pole, just like that one is. And it's a roll-up, so you can put it in a backpack, take it out, tie it to rope, you throw it up in a tree, and now you've got a full-on J-pole. And the giveaway of the J-pole, that this is a J-pole, is right here, where there's a little cutout. And that cutout means that this is the long length of the antenna, like that long J-pole there. And this part here that goes up to this cutout is the other leg of the J. So it's very clever. This is a classic, this guy, tax. He's a tax accountant, and all of his stuff, I think his call sign is TAX. I don't remember the prefixes. And his company is it's a dual band Slim Jim VHF GMRF UHF N9TAX is his call sign, and the company is N9TAXlabs.com. And then the more ultimate next step, well, you could say in an omnidirectional, the there are different kinds of Yagis as well, and as I say, you can have many more elements. They're very fussy in design, but with the right design, they're quite effective. Is this one. And this is the kind that I have on my roof. I think this one is a GMRS, depending on which one it is. Yeah, this is GMRS. So this is a UHF antenna. It's perfectly tuned for VHF because I tuned it myself, but for UHF. But it works well on a GMRS band. No, it's tuned for GMRS. It works well on the 70 centimeter band, which is a little bit lower in frequency. This is the ground plane part of this antenna. Instead of the cookie sheet, this is the ground plane. But what I wanted to show you, maybe you could hold that end. In a second, I'm going to have to pick it up. I hope. Boy, I didn't think about that happening. Yeah, there we go. Okay. What's inside this? So what we actually have here is 3 antennas. 1, 2, 3. So we've increased the aperture tremendously. And you'll see that, yeah, now this has got a loading coil on it. What happens is that these coils isolate the sections in terms of the incoming radiation. Remember I mentioned that waves add up? If you have a wave that's going this way and you have another one that's exactly the opposite, yeah? The peak is the place where the valley is. They will cancel out. And that's this being tuned, these would cancel one another out. This is called a phase coil, and what it does is simply alter that phase. A phase has to do with the relationship of 2 different sets of waves. It just means that each one adds to the signal it gets to hear. This one adds to this one, adds to this one. They add up, and we got all 3 of them working together. If we didn't have this properly designed, they wouldn't add up. And I have a very nice, expensive one of these. It's a tri-band, 11.5 feet high, and it's up on a mast, up on a roof. It's a 2nd-story roof from one side. It's on a barn, and I've had it for years. I came out one day, and it was lying on the ground. This part was lying on the ground, and up on the roof was lying those innards. And I don't know, some very strange wind, how it lifted it off of its mount, I have no idea. But the long and short of it is that it was damaged, and I was able to solder a broken part back together, but one of the coils was also stretched from that, and it doesn't work. I'm going to have to, anyway, another story I'll be trying to modify because it's a $200 antenna.
What effect does different materials for antennas?
Basically none. I mean, as long as they're conductors, but the better conductor, the better it is for the antenna. And in fact, that's a good segue to this one. This is a 6-meter dipole. Yeah? So it's made from 2 fiberglass rods from marking driveways or something like that. Simply, mounted in these eye bolts. And this U-bolt there is one way to connect it to a mast. The other thing that's underneath it is another way to connect it to a mast. And it doesn't matter what this support material is. It can be wood. It can be PVC pipe.
Fishing rod.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, a lot of them are these collapsible, especially carbon fiber nowadays, fishing rods that are 30 feet long for ocean fishing. They're used for masts. And in fact, Dorothy has one. Hers is about 35 feet long or something like that. It's crazy. It's wonderful. And she puts an Ed Fong antenna up on top of it. But the other way to use it is to make a vertical antenna with a piece of wire that's just strung from the top down, and that's a vertical antenna. And then you put some vertical antennas, need some radials to make the ground plane. They're just wires that are stretched out from the base. And anyway, this one is 6 meters, and it's just got some wire, plain old wire. And you'll see that it's folded over on the ends. I think this is the first one I ever built that I tuned. And it was pretty exciting in a way, because what you're doing with these is, I mentioned SWR. I mentioned resonance. That's the key. But resonance is electromagnetic fields. It's filling space, and it's affected by what's around it. So no antenna is in place is the same as abstractly designed. So where you're going to use it, you tune it. And so you put a meter on it, and you tune it for resonance and low SWR. So I folded over the ends until I got it into resonance. And there it was. So just about anything can. I saw in the latest QST magazine from the ARRL an ad for a make your own Yagi antenna. So just for the heck of it, I wanted to check it out. And the website was nice, except that there didn't seem to be any product. And I wrote the guy and he said, "How come?" And he said, "Well, actually, there wasn't enough action, and I just dropped it." And I said, "That's okay. I'm teaching this class, and I just wanted to show options to people." He wrote back and he said, "Oh, cool. I'll send you 6 sets."
Oh, nice.
Good thing to be doing. This is a plumber's special mount for a stick antenna of any of these kinds. Yeah, you just bolt it to the eave of the house, for instance, and with hose clamps, you clamp on the antenna. The Ed Fong antenna is made so the bottom 6 inches of it can be around metal, or maybe 8 inches. And as I said, the J-pole doesn't matter at the bottom. That's not part of the antenna. So what about, it's 4:30. The only thing I wanted to quickly mention is I wanted to give you a chance to use multimeters, which I have samples of here for you to look at, and to say something about emergency power, because most people have some interest in being capable when the power's out. And a few quick notes are simply that these are 2 what are called lithium batteries, but the new ones are lithium iron phosphorus batteries. They're very, very good. Last a really, really long time. Car batteries in that variety, you can only use them down to halfway of their capacity. After that, they're no good. The actual capacity of it, usable, is half of what it's made as capacity anyway. These go to about 90%. The lead acids car batteries lower in voltage as they run down. So what they deliver to the transmitter goes down and down, and transmitters are designed to have a range, but the power out from the transmitter goes down with it. These are flat. They say the same voltage until right at the end. I don't know if you use cordless power tools like my drill. You can be drilling right along. Next time you pick it up, it's dead. Whereas another kind of battery would be getting less and less and less power. this is a very handy device as a backup power for handheld radios. These are wonderful. There are many of them made. This is a jumper pack for a car. And I mean, I can start my car multiple times with this little thing. And the kit comes with a little set of jumper cables and a charger. So you set it on the engine, beside the engine, and connect it to the battery, hit the switch, and start it up. But it also has a USB 5-volt port. So there's a lot of power in here this is a 10,000 mAh. A typical handheld battery is anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500 to 3,000. So this is between 3 and 5 handheld batteries worth of power, while it's got all of this utility. Every car ought to have one of these. I've sure had to use it.
They should sell them with the car.
Yeah, they should provide it with it. I think that they provide it with a Mercedes. These are a couple of solar cells that are enough to power a handheld radio. One of the surprising things, I also have a battery pack that I didn't get out that has a little, solar cell on it. Well, that thing is basically a sales gimmick, because it would take so long in the sun to charge it with that little thing. This is this gap between, it's electricity, so they don't understand power. But this one does understand power. This is a set of solar cells, high efficiency solar cells that fold up. And I got this on the year-end sale for $100 off. It's 275 watts. So that's real good. Goes with those batteries. To use solar cells, you need to have a controller to handle the varying voltage and current from the solar cells. These are so low power that they don't need it, but any of the higher power ones need this. I happen to have on this a distribution box that is fused, so I have the solar comes into this, the battery is fed from this, and I have a splitter that connects this to the battery and to this distribution block. So I can plug in a radio, I can plug in another radio, I can plug in a charger, I can plug in some other kind of instrument. I can have, like in my car, I've got a mobile HF radio, and I've got a GMRS radio, and I've got a tri-band mobile radio, a 25-watt mobile radio, so I can power all of those off of this strip. I mean, I have the same kind of thing mounted to the tunnel in the footwell of my car, fed from the battery. And just to show the other thing about this kind of solar is that they use special waterproof connectors. This kind, MC, I can't remember the quite name, and they come with it. This is so.
Can you discharge those batteries to zero, or is it better to stop at 10% or so?
Very good question. It's bad to discharge any battery to zero, but this won't let you. One of the things that remember the fires from lithium-ion batteries, the one in the airplane, they had to deal with that, obviously. And so they did. And built into these is what's called a BMS, battery management system. You mentioned that when I was talking, I can't remember what it was that I was talking about, and I said you don't actually need it, but in fact you do need it. It's just that it's built into the battery now. And so that won't let it discharge to zero. But I'm glad you asked simply the basic question, because one thing about lithium-ion batteries is that they are not good in severe cold. Below freezing, they start to have trouble. They're lower output, but also if you get very much below it, you can't charge them at that.
Some
So-
of them do have problems with overheating as well. If you draw too much from them too fast, they can overheat and they will shut down.
Yeah, the BMS will turn it off. And at first I thought I'd shot the battery, it was ruined. But it turns out that you let it go, you let it rest, and you put it on a charger, and it will kick the BMS back into mode, and you got your battery back. I wanted to, this is for HF, the basic antenna is a dipole. And it can be vertical. It's one good antenna. Reasons for its being good, it needs to be on the ground with radials, or a much more involved one if it's up in the air. That's the one problem with it. Dipole is very easy to build. You saw one right there. But for that's a 6 meter, so it's a small wavelength. So a small quarter wavelength, half wavelength overall. So if you want 20 meters, you got a much longer wire. My 80 meter one is 192 feet long. But you can build that quite simply, because all it is pieces of wire and a feed point. And that's what this is for. You can actually make one yourself with one of these fittings on a piece of pipe, because all it is connecting to these feed points here. These are here to either tie the wire to, or the other way it's done is to tie rope to it and tie the wire to that. And these are the feed points. So for instance, you can, depending on your land possibilities, you can lay out a dipole that is, they radiate broadside. Remember the circularity. They radiate broadside, so you could aim one for Germany. You could aim a dipole. You want to hang it, height is good. The more height, the better in general. But you get height if you have the possibility. One way to get the height is with trees. Very popular amongst hams. You throw a rope over with a weight on it. It comes down. You tie a light line to that. You pull it back over. You tie the heavier line to that. Pull it over. When you get to the top, there's different ways of doing it. But generally, if you want one end tied off and the other end tied to a rope that goes down either over a limb or from a pulley, goes down and you hang a weight on it so that it can move up and down as the trees move around in the wind. Or you can do it with a spring, but all you need is a weight. The spring gives you the weight you would want to in some way contain, so it doesn't go flopping around. And the spring is fastened solid. The other way to get these things up in the air, we had, when we were doing one of our GMRS radio events, the one at the Ghostly Gallop, at the school on Fairview, the high school and middle school on Fairview, we were using a repeater that was a friend of the club. And I was also, one thing I do volunteer, I deliver meals for a recovery kitchen. I deliver them around at the time in Hudson and Stottville. And I had a customer there right off of Fairview. And I was walking back from delivering the meals, just da-da-da, and I see this antenna up in the air. That's interesting. I look more closely, and there is a long 2x4 leaning against the house. And on top of the 2x4 was a painter pole. And on top of the painter pole was an Ed Fogg antenna. And that was the repeater antenna, because that was what's his name? The two brothers. I see him in front of me. I'm not remembering the name right now. Anyway, they had the repeater we were using. So what it showed me was that, and I don't know what happened to the painter pole that I brought. There it is. So these are actually very handy. I had this something that I had built that was a real pain to build, and it took so long, such a pain, and to put up. And this is for my NVIS antenna system, and it's got. This is just a plate from a octagon plate, electrical standard hardware that fits over that top connector up there, so that I can connect these. Well, it's got two different aspects to it. One part is that I clip on those. What are those things called that you clip on your?
All the alligator.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Carabiner. Yeah,
okay.
carabiner. I've got carabiners with the guy ropes on this that I clip on these holes drilled here. And this one is the centerpiece, and it goes, no, it's one of the end pieces. So this goes up there with this on it, and I've got this rope that comes down, and there's this tie on here. What I do is the antenna wire is on there and runs all the way to the middle pole where there is one of those feed points and on to the next one. Well, one of the things, NVIS is a little complicated because of the ionosphere, and it changes its radiation properties, its refractive properties, depending on time of day and activity of the sun. So you very often need a minimum of 2 and often 3 or 4 different bands at different times of day. Usually you use the 40 meter band in the day and the 80 at night. Sometimes the 80 isn't active. Sometimes you can't use it at all and you have to use 160 meters. Sometimes in the in-between time, 60 meters is better. So I have an antenna that's for 80 meters, but it's broken in sections. One's at a 40 meter length. Next one's at a 60 meter length. Then there's one at the 75 meter, which is the voice band for HF. And 80 meters is a CW band. And so they have, they go to insulators, and there's a jumper wire with a connector on it. So I disconnected at the first one, I disconnect this piece, and I've only electrically got 40 meters, or half wave, quarter wave, right? I've got a 40 meter antenna. I connect that link, and I've got a 60 meter, connect the next one. And the way it's built then, at the 40 meter point, I can put on a thing called a loading coil and make it suitable for 160 meters. However, in order to change those, the people who designed it, you would take down this whole thing in order to get it down so you can make the connection there. I thought, I don't like that. And I had a sailboat for some years, and what I did was that I put this, in effect, pulley up there. I tie the antenna wire through this one and down to here to hold it up. When I want to drop it, I just release this line, drop it down, and brace the connector. But this is useful for anything, and it doesn't have to be this big. They happen to be on. Had this terrible experience at a club field day with how much time and energy it took to put up the NVIS, though it worked so well. I was driving home, and I wondered about painter poles, and I stopped at what's the other one? Lowe's. Yeah. And they had these on sale for $10.
Can't beat that.
Usually 30, 35. That's a steal. because this extends. You know, it extends 2 lengths inside here, so it gets up to 20 feet. And so you can get a shorter one and still get up. But, you know, this mounting one of these stick antennas, the Ed Fong, the J pole on here really gets it up in the air. And this concept of, you know, what I went through to put up my first 2 HF antennas was crazy. I've got these steel masts, they're made from heavy conduit, and you know, it took a lot of stuff. And here I see this guy using a 2x4. Oh yeah, it's a long piece of something solid and stiff. That's all you need. And if you want to extend it, great. And I'm gonna change mine over, but I haven't done it. In other words, I'm gonna lift the mast that I have up that much further. So those are some of the important elements on I'd say the antennas. The 2 kinds for HF are the vertical, and I have.
Christian, can we wrap up?
Yep. This is a loading coil, and this is a vertical antenna. Yeah, that can go up 17 feet, and 17 feet is enough to make it a full-on. Well, it makes it a straight 20-meter antenna, just like it is, mounted on a tripod with some wires going out. But this loading coil, it's called, makes it electrically longer, and so you can operate 40 and even 80 meters on this. You can operate a lot, and by changing the height, you can operate all the way from 6 meters, 12 meters, 15 meters, 17 meters, 20 meters, 30, 40, 60. So that's mostly it. There's other tools and things to show you, but I agree, I understand we got to wrap up because we got a late start. Yeah. So there you go. Any questions?
So many questions, but thank you so much
Don't
for hosting this. I really appreciate all the hard work you guys have put into this. Super informative. I learned a lot more here than I did in the licensing class. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It's a good combination. That was the idea. Remember, you've got my email address. There is a concept in ham radio called the Elmer. And the Elmer is somebody who helps you out with questions.
Yeah.
And very often an older guy or more experienced. Sometimes the more experienced guys are younger, especially in my age. But in any case, the idea is giving help and friendly help. And, you know, I'm an educator, and being able to help out in any way is what makes life meaningful. One of the main things that makes life meaningful for me. So I'm happy to, it's a gift to me to be asked questions that I can help with.
Thank you.
And if there's an interest, and we'll maybe put out word with other people on online, I'll send out a message in doing a session that is just for concentrating on the test, and maybe on programming radios.
Awesome.
I'd be happy to do something. It's just going to all be on me to pull it together if we do that, which means learning how to do Zoom. But my God, this has been, Mario and Ann has just been a huge, this would not have even come close to happening, and I think it's really been a gift to be able to do it.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you everybody for attending.
Thank you guys for doing all this.